All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the TriMet board meeting. Before we actually start the business meeting, what I'm going to do is open the public forum, which is the opportunity for those who would like to address the board, both on items that are on the agenda today and items of concern related to TriMet. We also have staff here available to answer questions. For those of you who haven't participated before, we have a sign-up sheet that's available a half hour before the meeting. We shut it off right at the start of the meeting. I have a list of those who have signed up. I think I have 6 people altogether who've indicated they'd like to talk with us this morning. And for those of you, if there's an issue that isn't under the board's purview or authority, we'll work with you and get staff together with you to try to figure out how we can help you with your issues. So with that, what I want to let you know is we have 45 minutes allocated this morning. We try to limit the testimony to 3 minutes, so I'd ask you to please try to confine your remarks to 3 minutes. There's a timer up there that shows you when you're about to have the time expired, and then it'll turn red when the time is up. So I'm going to call the folks on the list up 2 at a time, and the first 2 are Claudia Robertson and Paulette Rossi. Morning. You must be Claudia.
I am.
Good morning.
Shall I go first? Yes. Okay. I am Claudia Robertson. I'm a member of the Committee on Accessible Transportation and the Special Transportation Fund Advisory Committee. And I'm here to present to you on your resolution 160212. The Special Transportation Fund Advisory Committee, hereafter known as STFAC, consists of seniors, persons with disabilities, and advocates from the 3 counties, Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington, from both inside and outside the TriMet district. 9 members from TriMet's Committee on Accessible Transportation. There are staff representatives from all 3 counties' agencies on aging and disability, and in 2 cases, veterans. There are also transit and transportation providers and users from throughout the region. The different members bring a range of perspectives, helping all to think about and to understand needs. There was a total of 10.2 million requested in the applications that we got. Our district can expect to get something between 2 and 4 million. So it's quite a difference. That's if the stars align properly. So obviously there are still a great number of unmet needs. But this funding will be greatly appreciated and do a lot of good. Because we knew we had much more requested than funding available, applicants were asked to submit scaled-down requests when possible. The STFAC met twice after the application information was available from ODOT over the past 4 weeks for project application review, evaluation, and prioritization. Our final product stemmed from those scaled-down requests. Therefore, the STFAC recommends that TriMet apply to ODOT for the scaled-down proposed funding amounts and project rankings for the 2016 discretionary program, as shown in your board packets. That scaled-down number is $6.2 million. We believe this will give the most opportunity for a variety of projects to receive funding. Thank you for your attention and for convening the STFAC, and thanks especially to Alan Lato, Hannah Ritchie Quincy, and Jeff Sannon for their excellent facilitation and their mad organizational and math skills. None of this would have been possible without their time and patience. Thank you.
No, thank you, Claudia, for your help and recommendations.
Thank you.
Very much appreciated. Paulette.
Hello, I'm Paulette Rossi. 10 months ago, I had to come up with a way to remember Joe Osmond's name. He had been, in my mind, Joe Epstrom, Joe Epstein, and then I said, well, he's Joe Einstein because we're kindred spirits. He had a suggestion last year that he gave to the board and to staff that I had thought about a long time, but he actually voiced it, and I want you to remember it, and I hope you're following through on it. Last year, he thanked staff and board for going to transit centers and the bus mall for mass transit, but a driver appreciation day. This year, it is on Friday, March 18th. And he said, but I think you can do more. Have you considered going and waving banners and signs on the bridges. You got to hit the bridges, he said, during the morning commute and the rush hour commute. And I think it's a wonderful idea simply because when you go to the transit centers or the bus mall, you're talking to the choir. And we appreciate and thank our drivers every time we ride. If you talk to TriMet drivers who have driven in other cities, I have talked to drivers from San Francisco, Phoenix, and Las Vegas, and they'll say the difference here is not only do they get a goodbye when they get off the bus, they get a thank you. And if you go on those bridges, you are going to get more than the person on the bus or the person driving the bus. You're going to get the person that respects and appreciates the mass transit driver because they're in their vehicle and they have to face less congestion because of all the people that are not in their car because they're on the bus. So please consider his suggestion. And how do I remember his name? I'll just forget it. I just call him Joe the Man. Thank you.
All right. Joe the Man, did you have some comments?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Well, thank you. It's Joe Esmond, the IRS, the Alumni Society, and my spouse know my name, and children. One of my other hats, I help get out to vote, and the Hawthorne Bridge and Burnside bridges at 6:30 are jammed, so you can get a lot of people sitting there looking at your signs. So.
And if you have never
Usually it's raining. So.
Yeah, it is. And if you've never held a flag or a banner or anything like that on a bridge, you have not had an energy rush. I tell you, it's something else.
And you get all kinds of waves.
You
all
do.
all
and
kind.
it's invigorating. Even
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulette. Appreciate it. All right, the next two are Michelle Zellers and Ron Swerin. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, my name is Michelle Zellers. As a person with a visual impairment, I'm a TriMet user. I'm transit dependent, and being transit dependent affects my daily travel time, my job prospects, and where I'm able to live. I'm part of Opal and Bus Riders Unite because I want to make sure that our transit system is shaped by those who actually use and rely on transit. This month, myself and other Bus Riders Unite members spent hours on the bus having conversations about the TriMet administration's plans for e-fare. Some fellow passengers immediately said, yes, the equity concerns that Opal is raising will directly impact me or will impact someone I know. Regardless of whether they would be personally affected, bus riders I spoke with were all concerned about the underlying issue of transit democracy and the need for every aspect of Portland's transit system to be shaped by riders. Lack of multi-user cards for families was a concern that resonated with folks. All of us who ride the bus daily have seen just how much a parent, usually a mother, who is boarding the bus has to navigate, folding up strollers, holding children's hands, finding seats for children, managing diaper bags and grocery bags. Why introduce additional burdens by making caretakers pay for, keep track of, and swipe separate cards for every family member every time they board the bus? An e-fare system that doesn't work for mothers and parents of all genders is an e-fare system that doesn't work. My fellow passengers agreed that walking over a half mile in some cases to refill an e-fare card is not reasonable. If you're a high-income or middle-income person, chances are this is no problem because you'll probably have access to uninterrupted internet service plus enough money to put $50 or $100 on your card every time you fill up. But if you're a person with medical debt and housing debt, living paycheck to paycheck, buying only enough groceries to feed yourself today, chances are you buy your bus fares one at a time, and that could mean frequent half-mile walks to an e-fare vendor just to run simple errands or get to your job. Again, if the e-fare plans don't work for low-income people, then the plans don't work. Finally, in communities traumatized by racist policing such as ours, it's important to have clear policies about what information on e-fare users is shared and to whom. Passengers I spoke with agreed that for communities of color, the bus should not be one more place where folks are expecting to be unfairly profiled and targeted. The bus should instead support the livelihood of every transit-dependent person in our area. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to hearing about how you, as board members, will take steps to ensure that any new system is family-friendly, inclusive of low-income people, and safe for communities of color.
Thank you, Michelle.
My name is Ron Sworen, 1543 Southeast Umatilla Street. I've been following the discussion on the Southwest Corridor and the Gresham-Powell Corridor. I believe double-decker buses would be a very good choice for routes like that. They don't need the extra facilities as far as special lanes, stops. I mean, special stops would be good. But since they typically are about 40 to 42 feet long, they don't have a large footprint in traffic, so they're comparable to other buses. Several Canadian cities are using them. I think Toronto probably has the biggest fleet. Ottawa has a pretty good sized fleet. Edmonton started one, and of course Victoria has some. But also up in Everett, Washington, they started a fleet. They bought 26 buses for $23 million, part state grant, part federal grant. So that's a pretty good return. They're 100 to 110 passenger buses. I've seen them on I-5. So they pick up the passengers in their county, since it's a county-owned agency, and then make about 5 to 7 stops in downtown Seattle. In a case like on Barber, those could just work in with the traffic, so there would be no need to reduce lanes. I'm not sure on Powell. I used to live there. I don't know how it's presently configured. I just think basically not taking away lanes is a good policy if you can find a bus system that can easily navigate in the traffic. The other topic I'd like to talk about is why we need a new interstate crossing. I call it the Western Arterial Highway. It would be the completion of a loop around the metropolitan area. We have 217 I-205. And this highway wouldn't need to be a mega freeway. It could be a U.S. highway. And it would also intersect a number of highways. Therefore, it would be good for bus connections. Connections now may have to take a long distance to another connection that would help get a person. But if you can increase the networking of the routes, then I think it makes it a lot easier. My experience in riding a buses is that one of the things I like least is layover times, waiting for a transfer. Lots of other things you can put up with, but the transfer time, I think, is a negative. The other thing, and Joe Esmond and I have talked about this, is a bridge or a set of bridges across the Columbia could have a design that could have electrical generation capability. The Columbia nearly has a good flow most of the year, so underwater turbines would generate a lot of power. Electrical is the coming thing in buses. Hydro-Quebec in Montreal, or Quebec, Canada, their BPA, they even design a switch-in unit for buses where the electrical power is switched into an existing vehicle. So that's something we could consider here, and this actually would work well for all parties, and I'll be going to some other meetings talking about that. It's still an issue here that we need to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Appreciate your comments. All right. Excuse me?
I had one other thing I could mention to Dr. Bethel. If you, I know I-5 is a concern in Portland, and with my construction background, I started thinking of ways that could be spanned and maybe some parks developed there with new materials that are not so costly. So there's a lot of possibilities.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. The last two that I have signed up here, Dave Bouchard and Orlando Lopez. Yep, the other, straight towards us a little bit more. Yep.
That way?
Nope, other way. There we go. There you go.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is David Bouchard, and I live near Portland State University, where I'm finishing my bachelor's degree. I am passionate about mass transit and use many bus and MAX lines on a daily basis to visit friends, go to meetings, and attend classes. The design and implementation of eFare is an exciting transit development for this region, and it has great potential. However, like any major capital project, nothing is perfect. Of particular concern to Opal is the lack of low-income and group fares for FastPass. These options are very important for many of us who rely on the transit system to get anywhere. Transit agencies around the country are already providing low-income fares, such as Seattle, San Francisco, Denver, Chicago, Cincinnati, and Kansas City. Salt Lake City's Utah Transit Authority also provides group fares that are used by families. Many of these cities also have e-fare. These fare options would help many of us afford to get around without the stress of wondering whether or not we can afford our next bus. It would be a huge help to parents or other large groups traveling together to pay for everyone's trip with just one tap of the card, rather than 4 or 5 or 6 or even 8 people fishing out their cards. It could also help buses stay on schedule by reducing the dwell time caused by large groups tapping multiple cards. Low income and group fares are a win-win for everyone, and we urge you to provide these valuable options to your riders. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you, David. Good comments.
Yeah.
Orlando, good morning.
Good morning. How you all doing?
All right.
So I was actually originally gonna read my testimony, but instead I would like to take the time to read the testimony of 2 individuals who couldn't make it today because this time doesn't work for them. I would encourage you that TriMet consider having meetings in later times where working folks can have access to these meetings and provide their own testimony firsthand. So I'll start with Swemi. My name is Swemi Tooth, and I live in Northeast Portland. I use the number 4, 15, 72, and max to get to doctor appointments for my kids, to go to school, to pay bills, and to run errands. My husband is the only one that drives, and we only have enough to maintain just one car. He uses his car to go to work, therefore my kids and I depend on TriMet services. One of my concerns is that the closest store takes 18 minutes walking by myself, but it would take much longer if I were to walk there with my kids. This would cause me to miss my preferred bus times. It will take much longer to do the activities that I have planned for that day. I cannot imagine how the elderly or people with disabilities would have to manage to have access to these services in the area where I live. TriMet should consider some of the local stores that are close to where we live, including Mexican stores, where they can explain how they use services and how they can help how we can register our cars anonymously. TriMet needs to do more outreach. I only learned about the upcoming changes through a meeting with Latino Network, but they didn't have enough information. I know of many families who depend on the transit services, but are unaware of the coming changes. I would like for TriMet to consider a family card. Carrying multiple cards and keeping track of the funds in all of them would be difficult. It would be much easier if we only had to carry one card and keep track of the funds in that way. One last thing that I would like TriMet to consider is to implement a low-income fare. Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to present my testimony. My name is Lucia Llanos Pinos, and I live in Southeast Portland. I use the lines number 9, 15, 72, 75, and the max. I use the transit system to go to church, shopping, doctor visits, to pay bills, to go to school, and also run errands. I don't have a car, and I don't know how to drive. Therefore, I must rely on public transportation. My husband is the only one who has a car and can drive, but he cannot help us when he has to work. One of the concerns that I have with the new system is that although people can register the cards anonymously, many folks will not have this option or know of this option and provide their personal information. How do we know that you will not share this information with other agencies such as ICE? Does TriMet have the policies that will prevent them from sharing this information? Another concern is that the retail network is very limited. The closest place to where I live is almost 11 blocks, which would be difficult when I walk with my youngest child. The closest store where I live is a Plaid Pantry, which is only 4 blocks away. I would also like for TriMet to implement a low-income fare. Everywhere we go, the rent is too high, and we shouldn't worry if we have enough money to catch the next bus. Please take these thoughts into consideration.
Thank you, Orlando. And I will point out, we do have copies of both of those testimony in front of us, as well as David Bouchard. So thank you for bringing that. We appreciate that. And thanks for your comments. We'll discuss many of those issues, I'm sure, as we get into the ordinance later in our agenda. So that's all I see that was signed up this morning. Is there anybody I missed who signed up and I didn't call? All right. Well, with that, I'm going to close the public forum. And what I'm going to do is call to order the Tri-County Metropolitan Transportation District of Oregon's Board of Directors meeting for February 24th, 2016. And we're going to move right into board reports if we're all ready. The first is the Transportation Equity Advisory Committee. Dr. Bethel, do you have a report for us this morning?
Excuse me, Mr. President, I don't have a report for the TAC for this meeting today.
Okay.
I was unable to attend the previous meeting, and I forgot to get an update to bring to the board today. But we will update you at our next meeting on the Transit Equity Advisory. I know many of the discussions in the advisory group has been continuing around the e-fare, same issues we've heard this morning, low-income fare, a family card. So those issues, I think, are still prevalent with them in discussion, and we'll be discussing that some more, I think, as we move into the ordinance itself.
All right. Thank you very much. The Metro Policy Advisory Committee on Transportation, Director Martin.
Is not here.
That's right, she isn't. I knew that. So this is going to be very quick, I think, except we have one I know who's here who can comment. So Director Prosser, would you like to comment on the Finance and Audit Committee of this morning?
Sure. The committee met this morning. We had several items on our agenda. We received a preview of this upcoming budget from finance staff, and that will be presented to the board in our meeting on March 9th. So got the general outlines of that. There's still some fine tuning to be done on that to get it ready for that meeting. Secondly, we went over the fund balance policy change that is on the consent agenda. Our policies require that these policies be approved every year. There were no substantive changes to this policy that is before us today. There was reformatting and checking some of the definitions. But other than that, it is the same as it has been in prior years. So this is, again, to bring it for us for refreshed approval. We also got an update on the financial forecast. We had a chance to go over some of the assumptions, some of the charts and tables in the forecast. We had some suggested tweaks and changes, and again, that will be brought back to the full board on March 9th, so you can look forward to that coming. And finally, we had an update from Bernie Bottomley on some of the regional strategy update dealing with the Powell Division High Capacity Transit Corridor and that project, how that is moving forward, and then the Southwest Corridor also. So there will be some approvals coming forward from the advisory committees for our consideration later this year. They are moving along. These are both, there are financial implications to these projects. Powell Division is currently, we're looking at $120 to $170 million. Southwest Corridor, depending on the decision on how best to serve PCC campus, is about $2.4 billion as it currently stands. So we will be getting, those are in process moving forward, and they'll be coming to the board at the appropriate time. So any questions?
Any questions for Director Prosser? Seeing none, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Let's move on then to the General Manager's reports. General Manager, would you like to give us a report this morning?
Mr. Board President, members of the board, good morning. I did want to just parrot a little bit the fine words of Ms. Rossi this morning, which is we have a sort of major date on our calendar, which is March 18th. We'll have another board briefing prior to that, but that is Transit Driver Appreciation Day. And we do put out a lot of volunteers to actually be out on the street to actually thank our operators for the great job they do for our community every day. So an important milestone, and I appreciate Ms. Rossi bringing that up. Regarding the testimony on the electronic fare, I'll just wait until we consider that ordinance, but may have a few comments if the board has questions about any of that as we get there. I did want to begin with ridership. We did have a slight uptick in ridership for the month of January, but I think, to be fair, I would call that flat, given the variation of various numbers. Max saw a relatively healthy increase, 9.3 increase on weekdays, and 9.2% on weekends, and that's, of course, largely due to the Orange Line and the shift of passengers to the Orange Line. Buses actually declined a bit, and again, that's partially the impact of the Orange Line and certain buses being replaced by the light rail service. West had a very small drop, about 3.3% compared to this time last year. You know, it's interesting to sort of note historically that from every month when we opened West in 2009 until well into August, midsummer of 2014, we had sustained increases in ridership. Since August of 2014, we've had some declines. And we are tracking those basically to some employment changes within the corridor, but also gas prices. And matter of fact, at some point in time here in the future, we'll show you a very interesting graph that I saw for the first time, which really tracks gasoline prices and TriMet ridership, and they're pretty much in tandem as you begin to look at that. So a little bit more on that to come. Switching gears, I also just wanted to note that we have provided you a copy of the naming of physical assets policy. And what I wanted to do was just very briefly go over that. And again, your opportunity to provide us any comments both before or during or after this meeting. But this is a formal policy that then we would adopt. I would sign on all of our behalves. And what it really did is parallel the process that we had for the Telecom Crossing, which I think was one of the better processes we went through. We would consult with the board with all of the naming opportunities that come to us. They can come to us either by petition, your ideas, or ideas of staff at various points in time. We would consult with you, have a public review of that, and then make a determination. The current policy does note that the determination would be the general managers, but with consultation with the board. That's the way we did the Telecom Crossing. So again, I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Any comments would be welcome, and then we can proceed with the consideration of the naming of the Sunset Transit Bridge as was proposed to you at your last meeting. I'm seeing a card go up, so it may be a good time to make a...
Just a quick question. You know, haven't looked at this yet, so don't really know what's entailed, but I did notice that there's a petition, a process for people who come forward. We have had a group already
Right.
Proposing renaming of a footbridge for Terry Moore.
Right.
If we adopt this, would they have to go back through the process, or would we grandfather that one?
We would grandfather that one in. Yeah. Although we would consider, and what this entails, would that we would come to you with a description of how the proposal meets the criteria that are in the policy. So you would get a formal review of that and a chance to comment and offer suggestions. So.
Yeah, and that part I'm perfectly good with. It's just the process of getting it before us. So, yeah.
I do have one, go ahead.
Just, having given this a quick read, is there a number of signatures that are recommended? I don't see that here.
No, there wouldn't be, but I think that would be a sort of matter of judgment as we sort of get into it. If it's one, it might be.
I see.
Yeah, but if there's a couple pages of signatures, then we realize there's a lot of endorsement.
So it would go to the kind of the weight of the proposal as
Exactly.
opposed to being a gatekeeper.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And I was just trying to, for the record here, so we have we do have the request before us. you're looking for any comments we may have, and then
Right.
you'll schedule us back for the board to
Right.
have some formal adoption. Schedule-wise, you're thinking,
Well, I'm thinking that we would actually come back with a response to the response that's in front of, or the request that's in front of you at your April meeting, in line with the current policy,
okay, all right.
with the policy here, as you may choose to comment on.
And you'll make sure the people who
Yes.
made the request are aware of that?
Right.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, appreciate that. If I can continue, I just wanted to note one of the other topics we covered with the Finance Committee is that we have the potential for refunding some of our outstanding bonds. And I would just note that it's a very interest-sensitive environment we're at. We're seeing some fluctuations in the market. Our CFO noted that whether or not we go ahead with this is sort of 50-50, depending upon where the market is at the time that we note that. This is always, I think, actually a good exercise to go through to sort of, first of all, put together the official statement, have our ratings refreshed, which, by the way, they were refreshed by both ratings agencies as AAA rating, which is, again, as high as any tax-based transit district, higher than any tax-based transit district in the nation. So that's all good news that the rating agencies still think highly of us. If we are able to achieve this, we could see some reduction in our annual budget, somewhere between 150 and 200,000 annually, and an overall reduction in the cost of the bond measure of something on the order of $3 million over its life. So again, we'll keep you posted. It's very rate sensitive, and we'll know by the middle of next week whether or not this is a go or no go, or we put it off for another day, just to bring you up to date on that. What I wanted to do right now is to bring up our Chief Operating Officer, Doug Kelsey, who's been with us now 3 months. And actually give you a quarterly performance indicator. And I think provide you a little segue into a briefing topic that we'll have for you coming up in March as well, which is our efforts on on-time performance. So, Doug?
Good morning, Mr. Board President and board members. I'd like to perhaps cover my comments this morning maybe into 3 sections. You'll have a report in front of you, specifically the vehicle system and reliability section. I'll talk a little bit about service delivery, and then finally around operator support. And then open up for any questions, of course, you may have. Specifically on the vehicle system reliability side of it, the performance on the bus maintenance of way over the last quarter and the whole fare equipment side of things. In terms of the maintenance, all the preventive maintenance was done or exceeded all the targets, so I think the team did a very good job in that area. In terms of the rail equipment maintenance, the preventative maintenance dropped by 5.4%. Compared over last year, it was over 12%. That was really attributable to, if you can recall this, before I was here back in October, there was a number of vehicles, about 19 of them, that had water, a water situation. So the team did a lot of tremendous work catching that up. And some of the preventive maintenance initially fell on the regular preventative maintenance. However, the team deserves a lot of credit, and having worked in other transit agencies, they were working a lot of overtime to not only take care of those 19 vehicles, which are all back in service now, but also catch all their regular preventive maintenance up. So the results are low, but I think you'll see those recover here over the next quarter or so. The fixed route for the bus and miles for comparing Q4 15, you see that has improved, so some good results there. I think you're seeing that probably attributed to the average age of the fleet. A number of years ago was a lot higher. We're tracking around 8.9 years for the fleet average now, so some really nice progress and reflected in the results you see in front of you. One of the other challenges, again, was on the rail side. And you'll see this theme overall over the last number of months. Rail is really the area as we get into on-time performance, things that the organization has been spending a lot of time on and needs to continue to spend a lot of important focused time on, because that's something that directly relates to the customer experience in terms of the trust that they place in our hands. But the mean distance between failure dropped by just under 28% in the last quarter. Attribute that to probably a few things. One is the breaking in of new vehicles since the opening of the Orange Line. That's not uncommon. There's always bugs and things that you only get through running them a lot of miles into the coverage, full warranty coverage. There are a lot of modifications underway, working with our partner Siemens. And you'll see a lot of modifications, downloading software, replacing components and such, again, only through making the vehicles work in service. And that would also be, and the other one is we're also going through a lot of Type 1 of the early vehicle overhauls. 2 are still being worked on right now. 3 are in progress still to work their way into the queue. Again, that's not uncommon for a 30-plus year old vehicle fleet. The second area is around service delivery. I won't comment much on the fixed bus route side because that's essentially flat for the sake of 0.7% compared to last year at this time. And as Neil mentioned, we'll be coming to the board in March 9th to deal specifically with what are our plans around on-time performance and how are we going to deal with it. We are coming off in the back end of the quarter in December was one of the lowest months of on-time performance in the agency at 75% for the month. Since that time, over the last 30 days rolling period, and this is attributable to the focus the team's been putting on on-time performance, and some of this goes back about a year plus. So a lot of these things are in the pipeline of longer term fixes. Capital, policy, procedures, and the people side of it. But the on-time performance over the last 30 days, in fact, has increased significantly from, say, a low of 75% in December to just under 85% right now. So almost a 10-point swing. Still early days. We've got to stabilize the on-time performance side of it first, and then continue to build on this with the goal of getting to that 90% range over some time. The on-time performance overall, from my perspective, is we have about 2/3 of the incidents we control directly inside TriMet. Could be infrastructure, could be people practices, could be our policies and procedures, how we do things, if you will. The other third are a lot of external elements, weather, nature. We had one circumstance where a tree fell and we were out for 4 hours. So I think part of the process of how do we fix that is it's not good enough to be down for 4 hours because a tree fell down. So we're working with our partners, and I think we've seen some good success. And so we'll bring the chainsaws out a lot sooner, if you will, should that happen again. But it does attribute to new operators. About 1/3 of our operators are all new within the last year and a half or so. So if you talk to some of your top operators around, it typically takes them 4 to 5 years just to learn the nuances of the system, the peculiarities of it. And we have a 9-week training program. Now you add on top of that the extension of the Orange Line and a complexity of a Tillicum Bridge, et cetera. So they're coming up to speed very quickly. But ways we're remedying it is going to be putting more trainers to specifically help coach them, but specifically targeting not only to be safe, which is a given and it's a premise, but to how do you be safe and get yourself up the learning curve like any of us would anytime we're taking something new on. So we're trying to compress that learning time frame as we run more and more trains over a lot of the same tracks. Neil's already spoken about the West on-time performance. It did take a drop from 94.1 to from 95.5 comparative year over year. That was really attributed to, they did have some flooding. If you can recall back, the fall was pretty challenging weather-wise here in this region. West was not exempt from that. And so the host railway had some challenges, and therefore we're part of that partnership, and so did we. We're also going through some positive train control, the technology installment, and that's caused some challenges there, in addition to some switches and signal issues. We expect this very much to recover, though. I think it's a short-term burst. All in all, West's on-time performance has been very, very strong for the agency. The system-wide boarding rides per hour decreased about 6.8%. I think Neil spoke about this earlier. We think a lot of it is attributed to fuel prices. However, we need to be cognizant of the fact that since the on-time performance of that period has been lower for a number of months, I think that's a contributing factor. From the recent awareness survey we did with our customers, it showed that there was still quite strong resilience, and it really didn't change much in terms of their satisfaction with the performance. However, we are doing some follow-up research to try and get to any underlying issues that might be related to on-time performance, specifically into customer satisfaction. We just don't want to take it for granted. Again, I will speak about on-time performance on a lot more thorough basis at the upcoming March 9th basis, but we are focusing on, I'll give you an example of several key areas. One is operator training, which I've spoken about. There are some engineering expertise that we're looking to tap into with Dan Blocker's team. We are looking at signal yard departures. We're looking at terminus. How do you get in and out of the terminus on time quicker? The operating control center and our training, I think, are a couple key areas where those are internal working issues that we really are putting under the microscope right now. I think there's some good opportunities, but some of that will be cultural and take time ahead. But some of it will be covered in our operating budget that around extra resources and some of the leadership in the control room. Okay. And finally, the last point I would make would be around the max operator complaints. That increased, if you look at the data, from 4.1% to 6% comparing year over year. We think that's related specifically to some of the on-time performance challenges we've had, and also the fact that we've got new operators out there learning doors, learning switches, and I think that's probably temporary in nature. The commendations overall, though, between bus and rail have actually gone up very, very significantly as a positive, how they're actually managing some of those customer relationship issues, which is really favorable. In fact, I would point out on the rail side, it's up over 50%. Comparing year over year. So mixed results in my mind. I think some of the root cause issues would be really driven by that on-time performance issue, which I will report back. That would conclude my comments.
Any comments or questions from the board?
Just a comment. How many operators do we have that are bilingual?
You know, I don't know that. I don't know if Shelley knows that.
I don't have an exact percentage. We have a number.
We'll get that information for you.
So I see the ads around town to hire drivers. Is that something that would be on the list of favorability or a requirement, or
Very desirable.
Very desirable, yeah. And I know some of the restrictions, but so can we make sure that word gets out into the Hispanic community that these are great opportunities, and go from there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Great comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the report.
Mr. Board President, just to conclude, I would just note that we did have an accident yesterday evening on the west line between Tualatin and Wilsonville, where a train and a cyclist collided. To our knowledge right now, at least, those were not life-threatening, but they were serious injuries associated with the cyclist. And again, just to note that will be thoroughly investigated. We cooperate with the host railroad, Portland Western, in doing that evaluation. And again, if there's anything we can do to mitigate those circumstances or the chance of that happening again, we will definitely do that. We do have a briefing scheduled on some of the incidents that we've had over the last few months with the board, so we can go through that in a little bit more detailed upcoming. I believe it's in the month of March as well. And just to note that we will have a briefing right after the formal business meeting, and we will again adjourn to room C, where we can have a little smaller setting for that briefing period. And we have some very, I think, engaging topics, including the sort of status of our public records requests, which was one of our responses to the Secretary of State's audit some time ago, the attitude and awareness survey that Doug referenced, and the independent assessments of our e-fare system from the standpoint of management, systems integration, and security. So we'll have reports on those topics as well.
Good. And for members of the audience, you're also welcome to attend that briefing. That's a public meeting and open for your enjoyment and education. So that concludes your report, is that right, Mr.
That does, yes. Thank you, sir.
General Manager. All right, good.
Yeah, Neil, I don't know if word got back to you either through Aaron or Bernie. There's going to be a large project out by the Scappoose Airport. They're going to be building a training center for advanced manufacturing. Hopefully they get 250 people out there. The main sponsor is Boeing. They've done, this would be number 13 in the world, but be the first one in the United States. So I don't know how much you know about the roads going out to the Scappoose Airport, but there's a lot of restrictions out there. So I'm involved in this, of course, somehow. but maybe something we should look at, maybe be able to reach out to them in that county and maybe stage some people, the buses, and I don't know what, but I'd sure like to be responsive to the needs of states, Betsy Johnson, the state senator, and Representative Witt, and Commissioner Hyde. This is a very big thing for Scappoose, and isn't that far from the border, from Linton, so just FYI.
Appreciate the heads up, and I did have an earlier conversation with Senator Johnson about this, so
Yeah.
aware of it. It's on the screen, but we'll follow up. I appreciate
Yeah, just
that.
make sure you know. That's,
Anything else? All right, thank you, Mr. General Manager, and thank you, Doug, for the reports. Let's move on then to the consent agenda. And for those who may be listening in, the items on the consent agenda are considered routine and may be approved by the board with a single motion. However, the board can remove any item from the consent agenda if they have questions or concerns, and we will pull it and consider that separately outside of the consent agenda. We have 4 items that are on the consent agenda today. First item is the approval of the board minutes for our meeting of January 27th, 2015. Resolution directing that the reading of all ordinances by title only, and you're welcome for that, because we don't want to have our general counsel read the entire ordinance. There's a resolution adopting revised unrestricted fund balance policy and contingency policy, which is what Director Prosser talked about from this morning's meeting with the Finance and Audit Committee. And then the final item is a award of a contract to computer technology for the purchase of agency computers and peripherals, a standard routine thing that we do, and piggybacking with the state of Oregon, if I remember right from the agenda. So first off, is there anything on the consent agenda that any member of the board would like to have removed or have a question about?
nope.
Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor of the motion to approve the consent agenda signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion is approved unanimously. Thank you. Let's move on to our resolutions. The first resolution is Resolution 16-02-12, which is authorizing application to ODOT for discretionary special transportation funding based on a Special Transportation Fund Advisory Committee recommendations, which we heard about from a representative earlier in our public forum. So, Mr. General Manager.
Mr. Board President, members of the board, I'll be relatively brief about this, but because I think we had a very sound report from one of our CAT executive committee meetings, Claudia Robertson. So thank you, Claudia, and all members of the advisory committee that participated in this process. It is a difficult process. As noted, there was a very oversubscribed request for what funding is available. Very important, though, that actually the state legislature has been prioritizing finding some extra money for this program overall because of the great value that it adds statewide, frankly, addressing the needs of people with special mobility requirements and needs. As was noted, we originally received over $10 million worth of requests. Request was made then to scale back as much as possible, so that came out then at a request level of about 6.2. We believe that there will be about 2.1 more or less for sure for the this district that we're looking at, and again it's broader than just the TriMet district. It includes some of the outlying communities in the metropolitan area. With some luck, there may also be some additional statewide resource that can grow that as much as another $2 million. So we've been asked to submit a prioritized list of requests, and that's indeed what the STFAC has provided us a recommendation for, which is included and attached to your recommendation. Again, I would recommend your approval of this. And again, we can keep you posted as to what the actual awards will be as the ODOT goes through the statewide process of reconciling the recommendations that come from the other agencies. You might recall that you actually approved the a formation of this committee and membership at your last meeting. I did give you an update then that we are continuing to reach out to particularly communities of color. to find representatives that can sort of add to this committee. But again, it was very timely work that needed to be done in terms of the application deadlines. So we recommend your approval, and we'll continue that work of actually augmenting the committee of the membership of the STFAC. So with that, either I or Hannah Quincy or Alan Lado would be happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions? Yes, Director Prosser.
On the attached list of projects we're submitting, generally the requests come in the neighborhood of $150,000 to $350,000, with one exception, which is for number 19 for Ride Connection, $2.2 million. These all have little identifiers of what they're for, and Ride Connection's $2.2 million is addressing unmet need, which is singularly uninformative. Can you explain that one a little bit more?
Well, perhaps I could ask Alan to come up, and since Alan is volunteering to come up to actually respond to that. And Hannah, thank you.
Hannah's the real expert, but I will try. Mr. President, members of the board, Neil gave you all the great background. The one thing I would add is that initial about $10 million ask was purposely from all the providers. We asked them, identify all the things that you feel need to be done and aren't being addressed. And Ride Connection, because they have a variety of different services and a variety of different sources, they went ahead and lumped a whole bunch of issues that things like, people request rides and they're not able to provide them in the timeliness that the request is for, additional needs that they see that are things that their current services cannot handle, additional ride requests. And so that's why it has that sort of uninformative name, but it is literally, they went through and identified all of the things where if they were fully funded to what they need to meet the needs that they see, this would be the amount it would take.
Okay, and in terms of our submittal to the state, all that kind of background is submitted?
Yeah, there's actually a thick application packet for each one of these lines. We don't just send the list. The list is kind of the cover memo almost. And then there will be, something that probably looks like this that accompanies the entire package.
Okay. I think as we do this in the future, if we get something like this again, it might be helpful to give us a little bit more background in the materials. So
Great,
okay. It just kind of jumps out at you.
Certainly. Yeah, we took it a little too simple and just used the title that they identified. So we'll try to do that in the future.
Okay.
Big comment.
May I follow? I've noticed a couple of times when these distributions are done, Ride Connection seems to always be the highest recipient of multiple times in this. I'm wondering now, as I've looked back through, I've seen them on here at least 7 times. And so not only the 2.2, when you move everything together, probably 3 million or more, that's almost a lion's share of 2.1 to 4.1 million dollars of what's happening and why?
So Ride Connection is a nonprofit that was formed a number of decades ago with TriMet assistance. And they are able to provide a series of services that actually take pressure off of our Lyft service. So they can work with a number of different partners throughout the region. In big raw numbers, our Lyft service carries something just over 1 million rides a year. Ride Connection carries on the order of 400,000 rides a year. So they're a substantial portion of meeting the entire needs of the senior and people with disabilities needs throughout the region. And because they have a number of partnerships where they are often the operator, or in some cases working with and planning with and dispatching with individual providers, you see their name come up a lot. The purpose of their existence, and they've actually gotten some national recognition for it, is to help coordinate our service for seniors and people with disabilities throughout the region in a way that makes sure that they're well planned, they're not overlapping in ways that are inefficient, and using as much of the resources as possible to meet those needs.
It may be helpful, at least it would be helpful for me in my time to see some of those other agencies listed on there besides just Ride Connection. So I have a concern that Ride Connection does not become, you know, the monopoly. And then when we're trying to get something done, I mean, you know, we've got it all, and so we won't do this, but we will do that. So I do have a concern of always seeing that name pop up along with, you know, with others. May have some partnerships. Can't deny that, I'm not arguing that fact, but I must argue the fact that the lion's share of what's going out goes through them.
Okay.
And it's a concern for me that the other agencies are not rising to take these responsibilities and become lead, but are always being dependent upon one group.
Okay.
Any other comments? Or
Well, I just might comment on that. I think it would be very good, and we've done this occasionally, but to have at maybe a future meeting, have Ride Connection come and actually brief you on the partnerships and the programs. I think we got a lot of, pardon the pun, but a lot of mileage out of the work that Ride Connections does related to the coordination of, for example, services with Easter Seals or with the Veterans Administration or others, and the fact that they do that coordination and pull it together, and that we've gotten, frankly, other nonprofits to rely on them for those services, and they do that quite well, I think has been advantageous to making the dollar stretch to provide more rides for more people. But yeah, you deserve a much better explanation and description of Ride Connection services than I can provide, and we'll get that on the schedule.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the same thing, because if I'm sitting there and you're a legislator or doing a budget and you don't know Ride Connection from South Clackamas Transportation District, but you do know there's a bunch of these projects or vendors that are in Clackamas County or can be, and you think, well, why don't they all work together, or, you know, are we duplicating?
Yep.
And this isn't an attack or anything like that. I just need to have a map of how things work. Because, you know, we do know that people are aging, like us, and
Oh, yes.
there'll be more demand for the services. So maybe there's a better way, or I'm just throwing it out there, another way or to look at this, think about it.
Well, I think the first step would be
I'm not an expert on nothing on this.
a briefing on what we do, because I think actually what Ride Connection has done in this relationship that TriMet really helped launch Ride Connection, as noted, decades ago now, is actually become a national model. And if you look at, for example, the growth in Lyft rides, which are, of course, very expensive for us to provide, Ride Connection has been able to provide some of those services at a much lower cost, and frankly, more responsive to the client base. So I, again, much more than I can probably do in response to the question, but what I would say is that I'm actually a great champion of what they do, and I think when you see their actual services and what they do and the cost of that, you'll be impressed as well.
And I'd just add that the timing of the questions is perfect, because we are, now that we've gotten this out of the way, we are moving forward on the update to the coordinated transportation plan for seniors and people with disabilities in the region, which is required by the state and the federal government to make sure that we are doing that coordination across all the different providers. So we're literally right now updating the kind of the inventory of all the current services, and then we'll be moving on to strategic initiatives for looking at improvements over the next 4 years. And we'll need to bring that back to you, because by the end of this fiscal year, we're hoping that you will approve that updated plan based on the STFAC's recommendation.
Okay, and I will, for the record, state that I've been a big supporter of Ride Connection and the work they do, and they do a wonderful job. But I think it is important for us to all understand what they do and some of the other service providers that are out there. But they do help us a lot, and we've got a lot of new service provision that wouldn't be there if it weren't for Ride Connection, like in Forest Grove or in the North Hillsborough area. And that's why I'm saying, I think we need to have them come in. We should have Elaine Wills talk a little bit about what they're doing and where they really are partnering with us. But it doesn't mean we want to encourage all the competition and other folks to be engaged in this as much as possible. So good discussion, good dialogue. We'll look forward to having them available at some future meeting, okay?
We will schedule that.
All right.
Great.
With that discussion, is the board comfortable with moving forward? Do I hear a motion to approve resolution
So moved.
16-02-12? I hear a motion. Do I have a second? Second, I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion or questions on this item? Seeing none, then all in favor of the motion to approve resolution 16-02-12, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. Good discussion. Let's move on to resolution 16-02-13, which is authorizing a contract with Zimmer Gunsel Frasca Architects LLP for design services for the West Side Bike and Ride Bike Parking Project. Mr. General Manager.
Mr. Board President, members of the board, TriMet was luckily a recipient of Connect Oregon 5 funds that were put together really in a partnership with Washington County. And so the matching funds for a grant that will, in essence, provide a project total cost of $1.9 million with matching coming from Washington County in the form of $160,000 and TriMet, or excuse me, $250,000 and TriMet and the amount of $160,000. And this was an attempt in terms of the overall background project to encourage bicycle commuting, particularly in the reverse commute direction. So there is the proposal here associated with a bike and ride facility that would be constructed in Goose Hollow, which you'll note is at the base of the West Hills. And then again in Washington County, where there may be, again, sort of another place where a bike could be stored as part of a commute to work program. So we are interested in getting these constructed, and first step of it is design, architectural design. We submitted released an RFP. Again, to remind you, professional services like architecture are subject to the Brooks Act, and so it is a qualifications-based assessment that then follows into actual negotiations on price once the firm has been selected. And I would just note that as we released the RFP, we only ended up with one proposal. And again, per your request, we provided in the staff report some reasons why, as we went back to the others who showed up at our pre-proposal conference that we had talked to. And bottom line is that the architectural world is very busy right now. So we were pleased to have very qualified response from ZGF, which is a firm we worked with quite a bit in the past, and has done a really good job, both in terms of the quality of the design and in terms of meeting and exceeding our expectations related to the diversity of the contract mix and associating with DBEs. So again, this would authorize an award in a contract award in an amount not to exceed $315,000, which is part of that overall capital budget. That was part of the Connect Oregon 5 proposal. And the other thing that I would just note is that we are continuing to also work with both ends of this proposal to really work, for example, with the church and the Goose Hollow area for the location. And we want to make sure that these are really attractive facilities so that we have other partners as we move forward. And we see this as a real enhancement to our system and our community. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or call on Jeff Owens, who's our key active transportation planner who's been involved with this.
Yes.
Yes, Mr. General Manager, and in looking at the schematic that is present in here, is Goose Hollow going to be the same as Beaverton? Because we have Beaverton, which is probably about 4 or 5 years old.
Right.
Here, and then we have a new concept. If we're going to do Beaverton, then we don't need this, and maybe we need a little less money for the architect.
So new
Just a
concept.
question with a little bit of fun.
Appreciate that. And you're right, the Beaverton was actually designed for that site to accommodate the architecture of the Beaverton Transit Center. This would be a different site. But what they have in common is that overall program of how do you use this site, what are the security precautions, what are the layout. And so, again, one thing I didn't mention is one of the jobs of this architect is also to provide some standard specifications for us as we move forward so we can standardize this in one way or another as we do move forward. So we think that's a great advantage out of this as well. So it will be unique for the Goose Hollow and try to, again, match the station architecture and surroundings in that area.
Thank you.
Other questions? I just make comment, I think, yeah, you look at the Beaverton Transit Center, pretty big place, pretty big building. We got some design challenges at Goose Hollow that will require some innovative thinking and placement of this facility. So, yeah, I look forward to seeing what CGF comes up with as we move forward on this. All right. Any other questions? All right, then, is the board, somebody ready to offer a motion to approve Resolution 16-02-13?
So moved.
Have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's here for a second. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to them on the diversity part, especially on the not just the construction part, but the planning and engineering part that is good. Cost estimate. So at 20%, that's pretty high.
Good. All right. Ready to vote?
Yep.
All right. All those then in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 16-02-13, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. Well, let's move on to the last resolution then, which is Resolution 16-02-14, which is talking about the Board of Directors acting in its capacity as the TriMet Contract Review Board, exempting from competitive bidding a contract for design, furnishing, and installing services for closed-circuit TV-based intrusion detection project. Big mouthful. Mr. General Manager.
Mr. Board President, members of the board, this again is acting as the TriMet Contract Review Board, and what we're looking for is an exemption from normal low bid only, price only selection for this contractor. And our history with projects like this, which are a combination of construction, but frankly, mostly technology, is that what we really need is an ability to make sure that we are in alignment with the contractor, the design of the technology, that it integrates into our system, that we have the kinds of bells and whistles that are necessary for our control center to actively monitor these things and to make it really effective. And that simply takes a very close working relationship and alignment of goals. So this process that we're talking about, it would really allow us to have that kind of dialogue with the contractor during a procurement process. Price will still be an issue, still be a part of the contest. But again, the qualifications and the ability and a history of a contractor to work with the transit agency to achieve these outcomes that are noted in the resolution is really important and very much facilitated by the recommended contracting approach that's with the resolution. I know Mr. Supporter's here who can provide you additional information if you'd like, but with that, I would recommend approval.
I got to.
Go ahead.
You may not believe this, Mr. General Manager, but I can't quote verbatim from all the literature here. Have we worked with them before?
There is not a.
Did I miss something in here?
There is not a contractor here yet. So this is to allow us to do an RFP essentially to select a contractor rather than just do it via a low bid process. So this is even before we know who they are.
It'll still be open?
Yes,
for an RFP?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. And we'll be looking at, one of the things is experience with our system or integration?
Integration, not necessarily our system, because that would be pretty limiting, but the ability to integrate with other transit control systems,
Right.
And to do that in a user-friendly way is really going to be key.
And they'll have experience, whoever's picked will have experience with other agencies around the country?
That's the goal of the RFP process.
Okay.
So we can measure that and use that rather than just pure price as a selecting criteria.
That's your
Okay,
question.
that's it. Thanks.
One of the criteria is the urgency of the project. What is the source of the urgency?
We have had a number of intrusions into some sort of secure areas, and these include, for example, the viaduct over that's at the north end of the Interstate Max project, the tunnel. And while we have certain intrusion detection devices in each of those locations, they need to be upgraded in our view. And so it's a matter of trying to sort of advance these security protocols. Harry, did you want to add anything to that, or?
I think that's a yes.
I'll be very brief. Many of those systems are obsolete technologies. They're no longer supported. So we have to go to a new technology. And this is what the contractor would do, is bring a variety of technologies that are currently available, and then we'll make a selection.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I guess I would just, the question I think is for folks, why are we doing this? And the reason is, this is a good example, I think, of where we want to rely on the expertise of some firms out there to understand what we really need and then help us build it and have a competitive process that's based just not on the price. Because this is one where if we didn't do this, we would have to actually design, figure out exactly equipment we want, how it's going to work, and then put it out for contractors to actually bid on it, and then select the contractor just on the low bid only. And this is a good example where I think technology and working relationships and technology, this is a process that provides competition, but gives us a lot more opportunity to get the right consultant and the right equipment. So I think it's a good way to go, and I'll support this when we get a motion on the table.
Much better put than I did.
Okay, Mr. Stovall.
And we've been very successful in running projects like this and doing design build type stuff and exempting specific things from the low bid process. My only concern, is ultimately as we go through this and we pull out the projects that we do this for, I would like to see some type of and this is me personally. None of the other board members may even share this concern. But how do we choose the projects that we move to this level of exemption? Again, I'm very comfortable with our track record, very comfortable with our success. Understand why we do this, and I'm very comfortable with it. The part that I'm probably a little less comfortable with is the clarity or transparency as to how we choose the projects that meet this certain criteria, that then we move to the exemption, which again, I don't need to say it yet one more time, but I am comfortable with in the way we do it in the design build. We're very successful at that. So I'm not concerned about that or any of that process. It's just, how do we make that determination? What are some loose or overarching criteria that would point us in this direction? And we've got some of that here, but most of what we talk about here speaks more to how the process is then implemented, what it's unlikely to produce, all of those things. And I don't think I've seen us have a little more clarity around what pushes us in that direction.
Yeah. If I might, we actually do have a checklist internally, and we can certainly begin probably summarize that because it's fairly long, but make that a bit more transparent associated with these. Yeah, but yeah,
exactly what you're talking about and referencing there.
We do go through the rigor of sort of why and how, and then that leads to the public hearing and the findings that are associated with the process as well.
Yeah, I think an overview of that would be, then just a nice overview would be good.
Yep.
I'm not really a detailed person.
Happy to do that.
And I'll echo Travis. I was going to ask for a list of those. Same idea.
Yep.
Transparency and
Good.
Do that.
All right, then, with that, is somebody willing to move forward with a motion to approve Resolution 16-02-14? I hear a motion.
Second.
I hear a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion or comments? Okay, seeing none, then all in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 16-02-14, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. All right, well, let's move on to our ordinance today, which remind you that this is an ordinance we had the first reading on at our last business meeting. And I'm going to turn now to TriMet General Counsel Shelley Devine for the second reading of this ordinance by title only.
Thank you, Mr. Board President. Ordinance number 342 of the Tri-County Metropolitan Transportation District of Oregon, adopting electronic fare program and proof of fare payment provisions, and amending TriMet Code Chapters 19 and 29. This is the second reading.
Thank you. Mr. General Manager, you have some comments and thoughts for us before we
very briefly, Mr. Board President, members of the board. I did just want to note that we have had the chance to brief you at a separate meeting, and of course we had the public hearing and public comment and additional briefing at your last meeting in January. But I guess I would also just want to respond to some of the testimony that you had. I guess I would just sort of summarize by saying that I believe the electronic fare system is essential to moving forward in many of the other areas that were brought to you in this in public testimony earlier and at your public hearing last week. So just to note, for example, that the family fare, reason that is so difficult is that the current system as proposed will have individual caps. So it becomes very difficult then to sort of figure out how to do that with multiple people riding, and perhaps the caps would not be eligible, but that's one of the issues to work through. There's nothing in our future that says we couldn't move toward a family fare if that were the direction of the board. But currently we do not have that. We currently require individual ticket and flash passes, so that really is not a change from current process. But it is something that, again, I believe the system could do at some point in time, but there are this basic inconsistency between individual price caps and what a multiple use card would provide, which wouldn't allow that. I'd also just note that we, and the board has indicated the interest in a low-income fare, and again, we are beginning research on that. John Gardner from our staff will be actually leading that effort, beginning to look at some of the experiences in other transit districts. And again, from my experience and discussion, particularly with King County Transit, who implemented a low-income fare some time ago, the electronic fare system was absolutely essential to establishing that, because it provided the mechanism by which that recognition of special status could be made. And so again, the electronic fare system was an essential building block. Having the ORCA card in the Seattle area in place was an essential building block to moving forward in that regard. I'd also just emphasize that we have only just begun the outreach effort, and actually have some very widespread outreach activities planned. But it was very important, frankly, to get the rules of the road established before we begin to do that very broad outreach. That will begin, of course, in the next fiscal year. The budget that I'll bring to for your consideration beginning next month will include specific funds and staffing associated with that very broad outreach effort that we know is necessary to communicate with our customers related to that. Finally, I know that Chris is continuing to work on the connection to Plaid Pantry. That came up in one element of the testimony. We think that will likely happen, right? But we've got some technology to merge between the systems that are used at Plaid Pantry and elsewhere. So we're working on that. We think that that's quite achievable, and we'll be aiming at broadening that retail network with that addition and perhaps a number of others as we begin to move down the road. So I just want to note that what we have right now is not ultimately the final place will be. This is a building block where we can continue to improve the system over time. But again, I think getting the basic electronic system in place and working is really a fundamental first step to any of these other goals that have been brought to you in public testimony. And with that, I or the staff here would be happy to answer any questions you have about the ordinance and the rules that we're proposing for this system.
I think there's probably some questions.
Actually, a question came up with the testimony during our public forum. Someone mentioned, that they wanted the retail network expanded, including some of the Mexican food retailers or just general retailers, because they could rely on those retailers to explain how to set up and operate the card. Is that something retailers will be able to do? It didn't occur to me that they, quite honestly, I think of retailers, they're going to sell the card and they're probably not going to know much about how to use it.
I think your instinct is right. Obviously, some retailers will be more full service than others. But I think in general, what the retailers will do will take the card, they'll add the value and hand it to the customer. So it will be important for our outreach efforts to make sure that there are those other channels so people who may be confused about it have a place to get that information, whether it be on the phone, website, whatever, printed materials, all of the above. And again, key in terms of working with our low-income communities will be our partnerships with nonprofits, which again, through our discounted fare program, we have been building and strengthening really over the past few years, and that will need to continue for sure.
And that will also be offered bilingually?
Yes. Yes. So, Latino Network, Centro Cultural, other key in terms of the Latino population do help in that regard. And we're always looking for more partners as well in that regard. So, again, I don't believe that what we have in place is at all the final outcome, but, excuse me, but again, a building block that we can continue to expand over time.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a number of questions I think I should just get on the record for the people based on the comments I heard today. So first off, when might this go live? I don't know whether people understand the schedule of when we actually might have this operational.
So we are holding off on the specific date, but the very earliest would be September, more likely December, January of the end of this calendar year.
Right.
And we're holding off on the date until we go through the integrated lab testing, which happening next month. And then we'll see how that does and set a schedule based on that, those results.
Right. Yeah, I just want to make sure that people knew there is quite a bit of time for outreach and education, which we will do. Is that what I also heard?
That's exactly
staff are
right.
going to do. The other concern we heard this morning is about, an unwillingness or fear of registering with their names and people having information. And can you tell me what changes we've made there based on the?
Yes, based on that feedback, which was important feedback, we now the system will allow people to register with an alias. So they don't need to use their actual name, but if they have an ID number, like the 4-digit code that, often you use in banking or other situations, they can use any name to register the card. So the benefits of registration and capping can be done anonymously, essentially.
Right. And let's talk about the fare capping. So can you explain for people, again, what fare capping is? Because I think that is a true benefit, especially for cash paying customers. People that are paying on a daily basis with the card can take advantage that there is not an advantage. Could you explain that for anybody watching?
Yes, and I would just note that if my explanation fails, we have people who can really do this explanation. But I would note that the way that I explain it is that the system will determine the best fare for a customer. So if a customer has paid 2 round trip, say 250 tickets during the day, they can ride as many times as they want after that and not be charged anymore because they've essentially paid the price of a day pass, and the system will figure that out for individuals. So I think that provides a great deal of sort of comfort and flexibility for customers who won't pay any more than the cost of a day pass in any day, no matter what the no matter what the day brings them in terms of the need to travel. Secondly, and I think this is even more beneficial, is that once within a month period of time of a month, the card has paid the equivalent of a monthly pass currently for an adult, $100. Once that has been done through the multiple day pass purchases, for example, the riding the rest of the month will be free. So essentially it allows people to buy a monthly pass and get the benefits of discount that the monthly pass provides by buying it a day at a time. So great benefits in that regard, I think, for our customers, particularly those who are paying for it at a day and time. The other really important thing, which I alluded to related to the registration notice, is loss protection. So the funds won't be lost if the card is registered, and we can transfer it to another card if based on information and contact from the customer. So I think, again, that's a great advantage for our customers over what we offer today. The other important benefits are really that, frankly, it's faster boarding for our customers. And second, it hopefully will be clearer and easier for our operators who now must sift through, frankly, a poster board size of different fare instruments and recognize those in a flash of a second as valid or not. So this should simplify the whole fare box evaluation that the operators need to go through. So I would just note those.
And then finally, I think that if somebody doesn't have a card, needs to ride, I think there was a concern that we were not going to allow people to use cash. So you can tell me what changes we made.
And cash will be maintained. Indeed, all of our individual current ticket products will be maintained until we at least achieve a significant market penetration associated with the e-fare, and at that time we would do another equity evaluation and come back to the board with our findings and see if there are some other more permanent changes that should be made. Meanwhile, ticket vending machines will accept cash and offer single or day pass tickets, and cash will continue to be accepted at the bus fare box and transfers issued at cash price.
What was my?
Oh, excuse me.
Sorry,
sir.
So with the fare capping, what have we done? Have we taken a look at what the financial impact is on fare capping on the organization as far as passenger revenues?
We have, and maybe could I ask Chris to come up? I don't have those numbers, Chris or Tom. Specifically, I do know that our financial forecasts have been built with the notion of electronic fare being implemented in place. And we see both benefits, both credits and debits as we move forward in a number of different ways. Chris?
Good morning, President Moore, members of the board. Fare capping on a monthly basis is a pretty new concept to the U.S. transit agencies. We have the model that we looked at was in Canada. There's a couple of agencies who have rolled it out up there. So since we haven't rolled this out yet, probably the best we can do is look at what they've seen there as a baseline. Loss of revenue from fare capping was of minimal concern to those agencies. They did note that their best estimate was perhaps about a 1 to 1.5% reduction in fare revenue due to fare capping. In our analysis and our forecast, it's basically mirroring that example. And so in our forecast, that's what we've planned for. What I would note from that is that while you're going to see that impact to revenue from a fare capping perspective, we look at it as a bigger picture, which is what about other offsetting costs that electronic fare will bring, such as the reduction in cash and maintenance, faster boarding times, et cetera. So that's the general response is where we think we'll land. Of course, that is over a long period of time as the e-fare system ramps up.
So what is the impact? What is our projected impact on fare revenue, on passenger revenue for TriMet at the 1 to 1.5% that we've projected?
I would have to go back and look at the number. I just don't recall the exact number.
So, just rough number, fare revenue is about 110 million annually.
So we're somewhere between $1 million and $1.5 million potentially. And I'm assuming that the fare capping is going to benefit low-income riders primarily.
That's correct.
So I mean, so there's as I gauge kind of this process that we're moving towards, and I look at the e-fare I think we consistently are approached in regards to some of the plethora of things that we may or may not be doing as an agency. And I think one of the things that hasn't gotten referenced is the $1 million to $1.5 million positive that we are going to see flow to primarily the low-income riders that are going to benefit the most from the 2.5 hour, the capping on both the daily and the monthly. So I think that's a significant benefit. And, as a board, and as a board member, I'm constantly looking at how do we make transit and transportation more affordable for various reasons. But if you've all heard me say this before, I'm passionate about poverty to prosperity and giving folks that additional rungs on the ladder so they can move that direction. And I think this is something that, as a board member, I'm pretty excited about. I mean, we're essentially assisting in about $1 million to $1.5 million on an annual basis of the low-income riders and the low-income and transit-dependent riders that we consistently talk about helping. And I'm really excited about that component. The other concern, of course, that I have is in alignment with everybody else, the Family Pass, and so I'll also reiterate that component, the Family Pass. I think we have to innovate. I mean, we're an innovative agency. We have one of the we have the highest bond rating in the country of any other transit agency. I hope I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's because we're an innovative agency, and I think to miss this point, I think continues to push us back to the back seat. Now, the retail outlets, and we take this concept and we take the conversation of the retail outlets, I think sometimes out of the context of the total solution that exists. At least when I'm listening, sometimes that's what I'm hearing, and that's what I'm interpreting. But we've got lots and lots of solutions available outside of just the retail outlets. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
and I
correct.
think we've talked about historically and prior. We've discussed the smartphone usage among all of TriMet riders. Do you have that number at hand anywhere? Anybody that can reference it?
Yeah, it's at 80%.
80% of all TriMet users.
That's right.
Profess, and we've done this through a survey of all of our transit users, roughly at 80%. And when we did this with low-income riders, it didn't appear that there was some significant difference in the utilization of smartphones.
That's correct.
By low-income riders also. And so, as we look at that, so 80% of our riders, our users, have smartphones, which will have access to ways to utilize. Except for they wouldn't have the ability to utilize cash with a smartphone.
Yeah, one of the markets that addresses that is the prepaid card market. So you can load cash to a prepaid Visa or MasterCard debit card, load that as your funding source to a smartphone, and that can be used to then reload your HOP card through a mobile app. But that's for those folks who choose to use a prepaid debit card. Those have fees involved. So as a cash-paying consumer, if you go to a grocery store and load money to a prepaid debit card, there are fees that those providers charge you. But as an alternative, of course, you can just load cash at a retail store directly to the card, and there's not a fee.
So what I'm trying to ascertain as we look at this ordinance, as we look forward to the e-fare, I'm trying to look at the percentages and say, at what point have we done projections to even say what the utilization of the retail outlet looks like?
We have.
And what does that look like?
As far as kind of a month-to-month, year-to-year basis, I think roughly speaking, we would expect about a 25 to 30% usage of the retail network as the method that riders will use to reload. So if you're looking at sheer percentages, that's what we're expecting.
So 25 to 35%. utilizing the retail network. Now, okay, so if I'm looking at the numbers, 80% of our riders have smartphones and would have the ability and opportunity to utilize the smartphone as their ticket, as their pass, as their method of even interfacing with putting additional dollars into their account. And then you're saying 25 to 30% of people would use the retail network outside of utilizing other methods of. Is that saying that pretty much everybody who's not using a smartphone is pretty much using a retail network?
Well, there are many channels. So when you look at the totality of the user base, I think 25 to 30% are also going to get their cards or passes loaded through their employer or institutions. We also have just the online store. You'll just log into a website, set up an account, and load funds that way. And some people will choose to do that without using a smartphone or just go to a computer at home. But some of those users will also just pay cash at ticket machines or cash at on the bus. So when we look at that 25 to 30%, it's of all riders. And the hope is that part of that population is reducing cash at TVMs and fare boxes and shifting to the retail network. But as far as this vision that many more will go to smartphones, I think you're right. I think over time what we've seen is that the smartphone population continues to grow, and I think that we will see that over time, that less will use the retail network. But as I've said before, habits are hard to break. So when you've got an existing user base that they're used to buying their groceries in their TriMet Pass, they'll continue to do that for a period of time until or in which they decide, it's actually just easier if I do it using my smartphone or via my home computer. So I think you raise a good point, which is that sounds a little high. But I think what's going to happen is we'll probably start out around that percentage, and then we'll see it over time slowly decrease. That has been the case with the mobile app, at the existing mobile app. We've seen a decrease at TVMs, at fare boxes, and at retail stores. So it is making an impact, the smartphone market, but it's just not quite there where every user will decide it's time and I want to use a smartphone today.
Got it. Thank you for the responses to all those questions.
Just a minute.
My questions were answered by Travis or by Chris. Thanks.
Dr. Prosser.
One other issue, as long as we have you here, Chris, that was raised, has been raised continually through the process, certainly raised at our public hearing last month. And then I noticed that it was raised in the public comments that we've received since our hearing last month, and that's the initial cost of the card. And we are, if it's purchased at the retail network, it is a $5 charge, correct?
$3.
$3, excuse me. And if it's purchased at the ticket center downtown at Pioneer Square, it's...
So generally speaking, it's a $3 card fee. We're looking at offering free cards through many distribution channels, such as social service agencies, et cetera. The TriMet Ticket Office could be another channel where we decide to give free cards away. But initially, we're looking at trying to use organizations that are able to target low-income populations. So that was the first thought. The TriMet Ticket Office is a kind of a full-service general transit agency store that serves everyone.
And it seems like you mentioned a number of new cards that we're thinking about last time, and that is how much?
The volume of new cards?
Yeah, of free cards.
Oh, got it. 200,000 cards.
So that is a substantial number.
It is.
And that's something, again, we need to look to our partners to help get the word out on that. Because for people who are concerned about that initial card charge, that's a perfect way to avoid that charge is by accessing those free cards. The only trick then is that you want to hold on to it. Because
That's right.
A replacement card, you would have to pay the $3 charge.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Any other? Okay.
So just to follow up on my series of questions, I just wanted to say that I certainly think we should pursue as many retail outlets as we possibly can. So if we can get Plaid Pantry, I think we're much better off for doing it. But I would also encourage us as an agency to do one of the best jobs we've ever done in, I think, education and edifying the general population, our ridership, our stakeholders, in all of the options that we have. Because as I start to think about this, I know smartphones are not cheap, they're not, but a lot of people have them. It is a real option for the 80% of folks that really truly do have that as an option. It reduces the need to have the additional fee of the $3 for the card. It reduces just a lot of things that you have to go and process this stuff into the retail store, into the retail outlets. I just think we've got to do a really, really good job of rolling out the information surrounding all of the options and the utilization of those options and the ease of some of them over others, because I think that's going to be critical to, I think, the overall adoption of what we want to see in the long term. Because I think it's just beneficial for everybody. Again, we've already highlighted that to our low-income riders, our transit dependent. It's $1 million to $1.5 million a year, essentially, back into their pockets that they can utilize to pay for food and housing, all the things that were referenced. So I think the more we can get the information out there and the message, I think the better.
Absolutely.
All right, so board members, for the record, you've seen the outreach that's been done to the potentially affected communities of these policy changes. I think there's a good report in your board packet that outlines all of the places. And I want to commend staff for getting out there, and it sounds like you're going to be doing a lot more over the next few months. The board has also seen and heard from the community members through various commenting channels, including last month's public hearing and this morning in our public forum. What you also heard is our Transit Equity Advisory Committee reviewed and also provided comments to us on the January 6, 2016, on the January 6, 2016 equity analysis that was done. The board was briefed on that analysis on January 13th and endorsed its findings at our January 27th meeting. So I think we've had a considerable amount of input, and I mean, there's always a desire to have more, but I guess I just want to note that we've had considerable output and input and discussion with our communities out there. Before we move on, I guess I want to make sure if there's any other just discussion based on that. I think we've heard a lot of it this morning, but if not, I would probably say we're ready to get a motion to approve. Any other comments on that information? All right, then, is there a motion to adopt ordinance 342?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Is there any further comments before we actually take action on this by any of the members? Director Prosser? Director Bauman?
I will make
Director,
a quick comment.
I knew that.
Well, because I think this is such a critical step moving forward for TriMet in the region, our stakeholders and our riders. And I think we've been very deliberative. I think we've been very responsive to the folks that have come and spoken. I will reiterate that I think we do need to step out and be a leader in this family pass concept, because I think it's going to be a critical component, and continue to be open to the ideas, the fun ideas that come to us. There's a book I just got done reading called The Originals, and one of the things that they highlighted was in the book, the author referenced that as we are more knowledgeable and more educated about topics and information, we become less flexible as to the innovation that can occur. And I would encourage us to actually not allow that to happen. I don't see it happening, and we would just build an incredible bridge across the river and then the line all the way out to Milwaukee. We did it on time and under budget. Yes, I did want to get that in there one more time. But ultimately, I would encourage us to keep our minds open and continue to innovate around this, because I think we can continue to be a leading agency in this country on really, really cool and exciting things like this and the implementation of it.
Thank you.
I'll add to what Board Member Superball said, in that a request to those who've asked about the family plan and the ability to be able to tap one card, to not just come with a request to do, but spend some of your energy and writing times trying to come up with a plan as to how you think it could work. Look at the implications of it. Don't just do it from the side to say, let's look at what happens to people of color. We fully understand that there are issues from there. We understand that there are different strata in our community who cannot afford certain things, but don't make an assumption because one sits one place, looks one way, that they're so rich and you're not that way. It's time out for that. It's time for us to start talking about, if we want to do something for a family plan, here's how we think it would work. Here are the implications or the problems we see that need to be worked on, and how can we work together to solve those issues rather than just give me a family plan. Don't help very much. And then when we come back with a plan, that don't work. We need something else. And let me say now, I will promise you, you'll get everything you ask for or any of the things you ask for. So that gave you a broad spectrum, but we will work together to do something to continue to help our transportation agency be the best and continue to be the best, of which I believe we are, and for the great work that we have done in working with this e-fare and moving us forward towards that. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Esmond?
I'll echo everybody down the line here.
Well, I guess I would just say that I'm very supportive of this because I think using technology here is going to benefit all of our riders, whether they're low-income transit-dependent riders or our choice riders. I think there's just so many benefits to this for our ridership. It doesn't mean we won't learn, doesn't mean we won't change. And I think this is what we're talking about, is just a way to implement our current fare system that we have right now in a much more effective, innovative way than we have before. And so I'm looking forward to the dialogue about what other agencies and jurisdictions throughout the United States have maybe learned about their kind of forays into the low income mitigation programs. And I look forward to learning what others have done in families. So I look forward to that discussion. And again, I pledge that we will work with the advocates in a partnership way, and hopefully we'll step up to the table, as Dr. Bethel has mentioned, to really put some hard work into this. Because I think it is not just incumbent on TriMet, as I'll say again, to solve this problem. I think it's an area that requires state, local, nonprofit participation to actually be successful. So I'm looking forward to that dialogue as we move forward. All right, so anything else? All right, let's have a vote on the motion. It's a roll call vote. Ms. Devine, would you like to call a roll?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Board President. We'll start with Director Prosser.
Aye.
Director Bauman.
Aye.
Director Stovall.
Aye.
Director Warner.
Aye.
Director Bethel.
Aye.
Director Esmond.
Aye.
The motion to adopt ordinance number 342 passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. All right, well, that concludes the business portion of our agenda. Is there anything else to come before the board this morning that I don't know about? All right, then with that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting, and we'll take about why don't we take a 15-minute break so everybody can get set up in the room right to our left, going out the door to the left. 10 is fine. Okay, 10 minute, and we'll go into our briefing agenda. I'm hearing 15, so 15 minutes. All right. Thank you.
Members of the board, we're pleased to share three briefing presentations today. First, I think leading off will be Kimberly Okamoto, who you're familiar with. Been really key on our accountability center and accountability issues, and she's in charge of our public records process. And she'll give you a quick overview of public records over the last year. I think you'll find it pretty interesting.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about one of my favorite topics, public records. Yes, it is. Improving access to TriMet's public records is part of the agency's overall commitment to transparency and accountability. So I thought we would begin with a quick background on public records requests, or PRR for short. In 2011, 2 years before the adoption of TriMet's accountability policy, we had already begun to look at ways to better manage PRRs and make the process more accessible to the public. At that time, requests were primarily received and fulfilled via U.S. postal mail. That often lengthened response time, so we began to look at ways to make the process more electronic. So we began first by creating a dedicated PRR email address and inbox so people could submit our already fillable PDF form and submit their requests electronically. In 2012, that evolved into a dedicated webpage, which may be accessed via our Transparency and Accountability Center. The webpage outlines our process and provides multiple ways for the public to submit their requests, including directly online. And today, the majority of our requests are received and fulfilled electronically. We also created an online log that requesters can check on the status of their requests. And this is what it looks like. The data that populates this log comes from a PRR database that we implemented in 2012 to track incoming requests. The data is uploaded to our servers at the end of each workday and then pushed out to our website at midnight so the log is kept current. The statistics that I have for you today are also compiled from this data and provides insight into the volume and types of requests that we have been receiving over the past 4 years. Now, when we began tracking public records requests in 2012, we had about 500 requests. The following year, that number jumped up to the 600s, and that has remained relatively steady over the past 3 years. This works out to about 11 to 12 requests coming in each week. Now, these are the formal written requests that we receive. I want to point out that we do provide assistance via our PRR phone line, which may not be reflected here. For instance, if a caller inquires about a record that we already have on our website, we will direct them on how to access that. We also receive quite a number of inquiries about video, and due to the time-sensitive nature of video data, we may begin work before a formal written request is received. If the caller does not follow up with said request, that work would not be reflected here. Records analyst Dan McGuire checked with other agencies in the area, including fellow special districts, Metro and the Port of Portland, to see how many requests they received last year. Now, though these agencies range in size and focus, this provides some perspective into the volume of requests that TriMet receives compared to other state and local agencies. Oops.
Is this what, basic bottom line is why is TriMet receiving so many more requests than the other agencies? And does it go to the capacity of the other agencies? Does it due to the fact that we make ours more accessible? Does it come from the fact that we have more issues that people are interested in?
It could be any of those things. Metro does have the capacity to put more information out via their website, so that could explain why they have a less amount of requests, but it could be a lot of different things. We have seen a jump, I think, in the amount of requests due to people's knowledge of public records and by making it easier to file requests as well. So I'm not quite sure.
I just might note that the type of request, which Kim will get to here shortly, might help shed a little light on that as well.
Sometime, I'd like to see an apples to apples number.
We contacted
Seattle,
Lane
San-
Transit. We kept it kind of within Oregon. The only other transit agency that we contacted was Lane Transit, and we also contacted ODOT. So yes, I would be interested to see nationwide.
Just so, like West Coast, or what are other agencies doing or have done, or, you know?
Yes, that would be interesting. I will look into that.
I give something to do.
Yes. Okay, we've identified several distinct categories of requests that we typically receive. Litigation claims and contract-related requests make up the bulk of our routine identifiable requests. Media requests came in at about 10% last year, with union-related requests at about 1%. All requests that don't fall into those distinct categories are lumped into the general category, and those can be quite varied. So examples would include requests from the military for citations that prospective recruits may have had, and they're always time sensitive. They want to get them in the door as soon as possible. Also requests for ridership numbers and transit research-related requests that our old TriMet library likely used to handle. For example, we once received multiple requests from a Reed College student for things such as old boundary maps and route maps from the 1970s in support of her thesis, which she named, quote, Imperial Portland, the creation of a progressive transit regime in the 1970s. I think that has a nice ring to it. She later sent a copy to legal staff member Chris Middleton Connor and thanked him in her acknowledgement pages for his help with her multiple public records requests. Now, one emerging type of general requests that we've been seeing more of lately are requests for surveillance video that are not related to routine claims or litigation. About 1 in 5 requests that we received last year fell into this category. Security-related video requests make up the bulk of these and are usually related to thefts or other potential crimes that our cameras may have captured. In these instances, we will try to work with the requester and coordinate with security and with the police. Media requests are the next largest in volume, which is not surprising. But what is surprising is that we received an equal number of requests for witness video. These requests typically relate to non-TriMet related auto accidents that our cameras may have captured and appear to be requested primarily for insurance purposes. Been seeing a lot of those lately.
So video, what are I'm trying to figure out how to ask the question, but what are the parameters around video request? I mean, can people, security, media, witness, any of those others, can they just request video anytime they want? And then follow-up to that is that how do we store the massive amounts of video that gets taken across every single one of TriMet properties, both rolling property and fixed property? I mean, it's a massive amount of video.
Yes, there's a lot of data. So there is a window of time because for vehicle on board, it's stored on a data pack, which is actually a cassette, so there's only a finite amount of space. So you have a certain window to request that. For network video, platform video, there's a little bit more time. But because of the sheer volume, we can't keep and store all of that data. So typically when I say routine claims related video, if there's a potential claim, they will pull that data. Otherwise, a lot of these other types of video requests are not things that we would normally pull. For instance, someone may lose an iPod on the train and they want video. We've had a request for a missing cat who may have gone onto our bus and they wanted video. So we get all kinds of quirky requests for video that it's really actually time consuming because it requires staff to go and pull the data packs, staff to download the data, and to review it. So those are problematic, and we have been getting a lot of requests for that.
So these are requests. It's not necessarily saying that we fulfilled the request, or is this?
For video requests?
So this chart right here, we see this chart here. What you're saying is that, they make the request, but are there instances directly related to what we're seeing here, and as far as video requests go, are there instances where the request was made, but we didn't fulfill it either because we didn't have the data at that point because it was too old, or we didn't actually have the cat on video?
I'll kind of get to that again. Yes. A lot of times if we are able to fulfill it, we will pull the data. So we'll check, we primarily work with security and also claims to pull that data. If a person requests data or video a month after the incident, we wouldn't have it. So it'd be no responsive records at that point.
And there is no sensitivity around the video that I'm trying to think about privacy issues and things like that, but I guess once they board a TriMet vehicle or something.
There may be reasons why any record, including video, might fall into an exemption, and in that case, we will review it. For instance, if there's a criminal investigation related to it and the police are investigating, we will withhold disclosure until that investigation is complete and it's cleared for release.
Got it.
I just might add that not to extend this, but you will be seeing contracts over the next year plus related to the management of this data and how we actually pull this, and beginning to try to expedite our processes on it. So that whole system is being reviewed and remodeled based on what the descriptions that you just described.
Yeah, my question actually relates to a few slides back, breaking down the public record request by category, and the general being such a large proportion. You said that includes requests for citations that have been issued.
Yes, we get.
So that information comes from TriMet. It doesn't come from the court system?
We will issue citations, for example, fare inspectors, and then at some point that record goes to the court. So we will have the original citation. Those we get a lot of requests from the military. They just want to make sure that the applicant doesn't have any citations. We'll get requests from people who have gotten citations as well, who want a copy of their record. So those are housed in our security department.
So there's a record of the citations in the court system,
yes.
But then if they want to trace it, they come to TriMet.
The initial citation will be housed here.
Okay, thank you.
Where am I?
I think I was unclear. So if there's a video, if they think TriMet has a video of an accident that we weren't involved in, okay, whatever happened, do we have a legal obligation to give that to them? And
It's
is
a
that
public record, possibly.
No, well,
unless it's exempted for another reason, the answer is yes.
I think that this gets back down to the question of how long do we retain those records? Do we have a policy on how long we retain video records?
I think technology keeps changing, so it's difficult to pinpoint exactly. We have guidelines that we work with. For instance, that for onboard, we generally will have video for 72 hours before it becomes overridden.
Well, all I'm saying is I know for some, I'm trying to remember like ODOT when I was there, I thought we had a policy that essentially they were gone after a few days. Mm-hmm. That was, and it wasn't, and I don't believe that you were required by public records, but this would be interesting to know. You could make that assumption, then you have to hang on to that stuff forever, which.
We're not required to do that.
Yeah, and so I think our understanding of how long we have this, if we don't have a policy or understanding, maybe something we want to get nailed down.
Yeah. We can report back to you.
Yeah.
I guess I didn't phrase my question clearly. If we have a video of something that TriMet was not involved in, just happened to be a camera on the side of a bus, and there's a lawsuit or something, we have an obligation to go and find that and give that?
If we have it, yes. And it's not exempt. If it's not exempt, we would provide it. There would
So
usually
how
be
many
a
people do you
cost.
have on staff doing this?
We don't have enough. We're quite frankly getting inundated with video requests.
Yeah, we need to. Well, that's what I'm kind of sort of trying to get at, is some of these kind of like specious.
Well, there are
Frivolous,
some,
I guess, would be the term.
and I think as we go through this,
And who pays for it?
you'll see a little bit more, and there's Kim has a slide about that. Yeah, so I do think that there are sometimes, frankly, fishing expeditions, and, that's one of the challenges we have with all of this. Yet we have a responsibility to provide the public records if the public requests. So, yeah, it is a challenge.
Yeah.
And I'm going to suggest we move on, just given the timeline.
Yeah.
we're
Got our
in
interest
line.
though, that's for sure.
Yes, video requests are very interesting. Now, where am I? Okay. So when we receive a request, it's logged into our PRR database and then assigned to staff. From there, one of the first steps in the process is to acknowledge the request. By law, public agencies are required to acknowledge the receipt of a written request as soon as practicable and without unreasonable delay. So last year, 98% of all requests that we received were acknowledged within 2 to 3 business days, with over half acknowledged the same business day that it was received. So we try to be timely about our response. From there, staff will begin working on TriMet's response to the request. So this chart shows the final outcome of requests received in 2015. We provided records and completed nearly 2/3 of all incoming requests. In 15% of requests received, the requester either declined or did not follow up on their request. In 14%, we did not have records that were responsive to the request. For instance, an untimely video request, if we didn't have it by that point, it would be non-responsive. The next outcome relates to exemptions. Public records law provides specific exemptions which may restrict the release of records. So if a record may be exempt, we will conduct a measured case-by-case analysis to determine whether to deny or partially deny a request based on an exemption. So here you can see that we declined to release records in only 5% of requests received due to an exemption under public records law. Finally, a small amount of requests are logged as closed other. These are typically requests where the records were provided via another avenue, such as through our media department. Oregon Public Records Law authorizes a public agency to establish fees that are reasonably calculated to reimburse it for its actual cost of making public records available. In 2012, we implemented an automatic fee waiver which waives costs for requests that fall under $10. Last year, we applied the automatic fee waiver and provided records free of charge in over half of all completed requests. The automatic fee waiver has also enabled us to process requests much more quickly. So for example, if a record is readily available when a request comes in, we can waive costs and send it out that day. For requests where cost is involved, we will provide the requester with an estimate of fees and wait for prepayment and confirmation to proceed. Oregon Public Records Law provides requires public bodies to provide proper and reasonable opportunities to inspect records. The Oregon Attorney General advises that how quickly a public body can reasonably make non-exempt public records available will depend on various factors. For instance, the availability of staff to respond to the request or perhaps the volume of records requested. The AG advises that in the usual case, it should be possible to make the requested records available within 10 working days. So using that as a baseline, we produced records within 10 working days in 73% of all completed requests in 2015. 16% were produced the same business day that the request was received. In 27% of completed requests, records were produced after 11 or more business days. The Attorney General does acknowledge that in some cases, more time, even significantly more time, may be required to respond to a request. So keeping this in mind, here's a breakdown of the main reasons why why requests were kept open 11 or more days last year. The biggest reason is related to payment. As previously mentioned, if there is a cost associated with a request, we will provide the requester with a cost estimate and wait for prepayment or confirmation to proceed. If the requester does not send payment in a timely manner, that will delay their request. If a request is vague, we will seek clarification. For example, last year we received a request for, quote, court recounts in Carcetoon time, etc., and, quote, Patricia Newton, New Jersey, New York. To this day, I still don't know what they were requesting. So we will wait for clarification, but if the requester does not respond within 30 days, we will send them a letter and close their request. Sometimes this reminds them that they made a request and they will ask us to reopen it, but by that point, the request is already over 30 days old. Some requests are...
This is a point of information. There is a West New York, New Jersey. It's a city right across the... If it ever comes across, it's real.
Okay.
I've been there.
Good to know. Okay, let's see. Some requests are complex. These typically involve multiple staff or divisions to locate responsive records. They may require a legal review for exempt material, and it may be broad in scope. For instance, one request we received last year had 11 subparts, so quite a bit of going back and forth trying to narrow that request. Internal reasons could include unavailability of staff, so there may be delays typically around the holidays or school breaks. Also, for the majority of staff, public records is not their primary duty, so they will fit it in as best they can among competing priorities. So sometimes there is a delay in receiving records from staff. Finally, there may be timing issues that may affect how long a request is kept open. For instance, the requested record may be unavailable, but will become available at a known date. In that instance, we will let the requester know and keep the request open until it can be fulfilled. So in the 5 or so years that I've been involved with public records, I have found it to be complex, occasionally quirky, but never boring. Last year, we had a request from a private investigator looking for old bus route information that could possibly exonerate someone who was convicted of a 1994 murder case. We also had video requests for a man wielding stolen axes at a MAX station and a woman toting a 4-foot lizard on a MAX train. And here she is. I don't know. So I look forward to seeing what 2016 has in store for us. That's it. Any questions?
Oh, I've got lots of questions, I'm sure. I guess I'd just say, my goodness, the customer service you provide is pretty amazing. I guess I want to, if nobody said that, that's you're unbelievably responsive. I think I think this whole video thing is one that I think we probably need to understand a bit more, but I suspect that since we are so responsive, that's another reason that we are getting the requests that we get in many ways. So I think you're creating your own workload by being effective and efficient. So congratulations to you.
That was part of the audit.
That's right. So I'm glad to see this. This is clearly we've got a handle on the public records requests, and the response and the timing, I don't know how anybody could be upset about any of those kinds of metrics in terms of what we're doing. So thank you.
Great. Well, thank you.
I have a question. And Bruce, heartily second what Bruce said about the amazing service you provide. And having supervised records management at City of Tigard before I became city manager, and having worked with records management at City of Portland way back in the old days, I do have a lot of respect for what you do, so thank you.
Thank you.
One of the questions I have, and it actually comes out of my experience at Tigard, in dealing with land use issues, when people want to come in and inspect the record, the land use record, of course, is a quasi-judicial record, and we had to be very careful to make sure that the file was not tampered with, either material removed or material inserted. And so if someone would come in, asked to inspect a file, and we had to have staff sitting there with them. Do we have that kind of situation here at all?
Yes, we do occasionally. We had one request where citation, the media wanted to come in and look through all of the boxes and boxes of original citations, and because they were originals, we had to supervise them, and so that's staff time taken away from other duties.
Exactly. So that, that's another aspect of this, is that we have to make the records available, but we also have to make sure that they're secure, so.
Yes, and you can charge for that time if you have to. If it's original records that require supervision, you can include that in the cost estimate. But still, if they pay, that's still time taken away from your other primary duties.
Right.
I would also note that Kimberly is leading our other efforts to modernize our records overall, streamline our records, clean our records, make sure that we're in compliance with records law. So this is not her full-time job, I would note, that actually leading that whole records process, modernization process within the agency is also a big emphasis, and she does a great job with that too, so just to know.
Right. Well, thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, we have an additional two more items here, but this was, as you know, each year we do an attitude and awareness survey where we check in with our population to see how they perceive TriMet and how TriMet is doing. And we're very pleased to have DHM provide those services to us, and they have for a number of years. And so I understand Sue Midgell is here. Sue, yes, Sue. To give a quick presentation on this year's findings. So Sue, thank you.
Thank you, Neil. We also have Michelle Neese, who's been working on all of the subgroup demographic analysis. So if there are any questions about that, we're both here. I don't know how anyone is supposed to follow the public records request, but we're going to try. Okay? So let's go over public data. All right. Some quick highlights before we get into some of the nitty-gritty behind the data. Overall approval of TriMet remains consistently high. Michelle and I do work and assess public attitudes towards other government agencies. TriMet is right there, really at the top in terms of public approval and satisfaction. So I think that says a lot for the staff and for all the work that everybody does in this room. High numbers across the board. Part of that, I think, is helped by the perception of high number of safety and reliability. So TriMet is perceived to be very safe by the public and highly reliable. And we'll go into more of the specific data behind that. Okay. Now, riders this year, as we have done this for the past several years, and there's quite a long history of the attitude and awareness data to review, but 77% of the general population in the Tri-County area are riders of TriMet. That's a little bit of a dip from what we've seen at a high of 80%. Some of that could be what's going on in the economy. The economy has improved. I think people have more means to be able to take their own vehicle. Gas prices can have an impact as well. We see that ridership does fluctuate, whether it's here or in DC or New York or San Francisco. And we would like to take questions along the way. We have maybe about 10 slides of data to go through. Okay. So public mood, one of the things that we like to do is take a look at where's the public generally outside of TriMet and their approval of TriMet. And one of the questions we ask is just about right direction, wrong track. Okay. And when we look at that kind of historically, you'll see dips during high unemployment, recession. People feel a little bit better as things improve. And today, kind of when we look at 2015, Right direction numbers are above 50%. In an urban area, we're going to see higher optimism, higher ratings for that. So if you look at the dot, that's the statewide right direction numbers, which is going to be in the mid 40. You go into somewhere like Burns, Oregon, right? If we had asked that question, you can just imagine what right direction numbers are going to be. Go down to continue in Southern Oregon, where they're having a lot of issues not being able to pass ballot measures for public services. Right direction numbers are going to be pretty low. So Portland, Eugene, maybe even Bend, now that the economy is better, is going to see more optimistic views. And what that does is it shifts people's perception into how they're going to rate government agencies. So there may be a certain amount of things that as an agency, TriMet can do, but there are also other things you just can't control, and that's people's public mood. Okay. Looking at ridership data specifically, as I mentioned earlier, ridership is down some. So if you look at this line graph and just look at the 2015 numbers, there is a little bit of a dip there. And again, we may see these numbers go back up next year, but I think that it's still a little bit too early to make any real judgments on whether that's an ongoing trend or not. Okay. But overall, for any agency to have a market penetration of about 75, 80%, that's a pretty high number. And that's a great avenue, especially for communications and any kind of public messaging, that any organization would have access to 80% of the population. Okay? And about half of those riders are frequent or more regular riders. Okay? Very high numbers. And I think as millennials, one of my favorite groups to talk about and make fun of, so as millennials and both boomers, right, come into the workforce, and millennials about 10 years from now will make up over half of the workforce numbers, we may start to see the more frequent riders numbers increase. So that's a trend worth watching. Let's go into some of the approval satisfaction numbers. It's a lot of data points here. Wanted to show some of the historical, but bottom line, there's high approval across the board. Okay? And that dip in 2013, that may just actually be a blip. There's no real reason. Maybe we can associate it to coming out of a recession. I think we could still agree that Portland was still in a recession in 2013. But overall, if we took that out and just looked at the numbers, you have high satisfaction and approval ratings for the overall job that TriMet does, which is in the green, right? And then a darker kind of blue that's specific for bus, and the lighter blue is max. So you see max is the highest consistently for approval and satisfaction.
Curious how the overall job relates to the bus and max. With both of those being higher, why is the overall job rating the lowest of the three?
We look at an average, and the bus system, right, will bring the numbers down a little bit.
Mm-hmm. But even so, the overall job is at 72%, the bus is 74%. So it doesn't feel like an average.
Yeah.
It might have to do with, if you ask people about a specific bus or the MAX, they have slightly better ideas of those specific systems than maybe the general TriMet. Fairly or not, maybe general TriMet gets some of the, I'm not quite happy with something.
Yeah.
And those were, in looking at this, those were separate questions. So we asked about TriMet overall,
okay,
and then we asked about bus and about MAX. So 3 separate questions.
Okay.
I can see people really liking light rail, but their park and ride is full when they get there.
Yeah.
So I could see that there's could be some really opportunities for people to rank overall, probably down below some of the service on a light rail or the bus.
But to see 70, and I want to make this point, but to have 70% minimum across the board, 70 to 80%, is not an easy number to hit for a public agency. Rarely do we see that. You're going to see closer to 55, 60%. So a 10 to 20 point bump is nothing to scoff at. So I think part of the link to the high numbers is likely the perception that people have of high safety and high reliability. And when we ask people's perception of how safe is bus on the left and max on the right, when you have over 70% say it is safe for either bus or max, I'm not sure that we're going to see better numbers than that. And in the orange bar, those are people who say that they disapprove of the safety. Those are, low teens there. 15% of people in any population, anything we ask about, are going to give a negative response. They're not going to like a single thing. So it's really difficult to even shift those 15%, right? And those are pretty standard don't knows. And for bus, there are going to be more people who don't have an experience with a bus ride, say, compared to max. But high numbers here. Looking at reliability, which we know is a big value for TriMet. And again, we used a different scale here and asked people to rate the reliability. And this is their own perception, both riders and non-riders, on a scale of 1 to 7. The midpoint is going to be a 4, right? And that's where we see a lot of people kind of cluster. Even if it's a scale of 0 to 10, you're going to see lots of 5s or 6. And here, you're just not going to get a 7, which is the perfect score, but get so close to a 6 for max. So having a 5.7 for max and a rating of 5.4 is really, I think, something to celebrate in terms of people's perception of reliability. And I think we recognize that there were some blips with the weather, and this was done before a lot of I think some of the weather-related delays. But I'm not sure, looking at the historical data, that the numbers really would have shifted that much. Okay, the high satisfaction and approval really gives TriMet more bandwidth, right, when there are delays. So overcrowding was a new question that we asked about, and we wanted to know what people's perceptions were of overcrowding being a perceived barrier. And when you ask that question of non-riders, roughly about a quarter say that overcrowding is a barrier for them not to use TriMet. 25%, again, if you take 15% of any population, that won't change their behavior. It's really not a very significant number there, right? So you basically have 75% of your population saying it's not an issue. And when you look at riders then, who have the experience, only 5%, when you factor in margin of error, that's almost nobody, right? So for riders, any perceived barrier around overcrowding, it's really a non-issue. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle to talk about some of our ridership numbers.
Thank you, Sue. First, you can see here that there was a slight switch this year. Your riders, more people are riding max only, and that switch came quite a bit from people who used to ride bus and max. So probably the orange line could be one reason for that shift. When we look at why people ride, your frequent and regular riders, it's one thing to see is that they're actually riding for a lot of reasons in their day-to-day life, which is great. They also ride primarily for work, recreation, and going to school. Again, it's nice to see that they use TriMet for a variety of activities. Your occasional and infrequent riders are mostly using TriMet to get to a recreation, probably Timbers games, that kind of thing, and of course, going to the airport. We also asked a new question this year about riding the bicycle and whether it's brought on board. About 16% of your riders bring a bicycle on board, or they ride a bicycle to connect to TriMet, and the vast majority of those, 74%, bring it on board.
So one of the things I'll note, though, is if you want to change behavior, then based on this data, there needs to be more instruction, more education, I think more options for how to change that behavior.
We asked a bit about whether people would buy their fare over a smartphone or over the internet. The major thing to take away is that over half would definitely be interested in doing that, and probably if we gave them a more specific question, you would raise those numbers. For example, if you could use your phone as your ticket. So those are good numbers. The important thing is that the vast majority of your riders have a smartphone, and the vast majority have a cell phone.
Did you ask how many do have a smartphone?
Yes, 80% of your riders have a smartphone, and 96% of your riders have access to the internet. So very strong penetration there of access. We asked a few questions about upcoming projects that TriMet has in the works. Overall, you see that awareness is rather modest. The project that people were most aware of was the Barber HCT project, which was about 1 in 5 were aware of that project, and few were aware of the HOP Fast Pass or the Bus Rapid Transit. And of the people who were of Bus Rapid Transit idea, about 4 in 10 were aware of the proposed Powell Division route. So one thing to consider here is that if you wish to raise awareness about these projects, there's a really good opportunity right now for TriMet to tell the story about those projects.
Question, if I may. Did you specifically ask about Barber HCT? And the reason I ask is because mostly what we talk about is the Southwest Corridor or the Barber 99, and I wonder, so I think how you identified it might impact the response you got.
So we specifically asked about, are you aware of a discussion of a possible future busway or light rail project between Portland and Tigard and Tualatin along Barber Boulevard?
You got it. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, just making sure. And I think we're at the end. We're at the end. So there's about 60 other more questions. So if you'd like additional data beyond the public records request, it's available for you. And I just have to share that these high approval numbers, I know oftentimes when we give presentations, people focus on the negative numbers. How can we improve or decrease those negative numbers? I think to a degree, there may just be a cap here, right? That the high ratings that we see for TriMet above 70 to even 80%, while of course we can always improve, those are about as good as I see for public agencies. And it just goes to show the amount of work and the hard efforts that the frontline staff and the folks in this room and in the TriMet, I think, building do to provide, good public service. So kudos to the staff.
I'm looking at Neil, I would be interested in seeing for similar kind of survey data for our standard kind of comparators, if it's available. It may not be, and I think that would help underline.
We can share that with you. There's always a little fear of how the questions are, little apples and oranges noise in that, but we can definitely share that. And as Sue noted, it is dramatically different. And part of that is the single-purpose nature of TriMet's work, which I think there's a great appreciation for in the public about the service that we provide, and it's very identifiable, and obviously we're very ubiquitous in the community, so all of that, I think, contributes to that, as well as, you noted, I think some really terrific work, including the bus operator I had this morning on the number 1, who was just outstanding in terms of the service she was providing her customers, and that's noted That's noticed.
Okay, so Neil didn't pay me to say this, but for context, I think you could take something like the Metro in DC or the BART in San Francisco, and though they have high market penetration, they don't have the numbers like this, not even close. So I think there's a lot more, to how well TriMet operates in the story that you tell.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good. Yes.
And we'll continue to program these surveys on an annual basis. As you remember, during the recession, we kind of skipped some years just based on the budget issues, and one of the recommendations that came from the Secretary of State's audit was to do this every year, to do a check-in, to make sure that you have the information as well as the rest of the staff about how we're doing with the general population. So appreciate that. Yes.
Do we have to update the Secretary of State's office on the audit every year, or is there any an obligation, or just a check-in with Gene?
We do informal check-ins, and actually, but
Okay.
there was a formal sort of check-in, if you will, which occurred at a fixed time, and I'm not even going to remember.
Yeah,
Somebody might remind me.
that
It
kinda
occurred
sounds
after the
familiar,
completion of
right.
it, and we briefed you on that as well.
Yeah.
And what they wanted to see was that we were following up on all the findings, which of course we did, and we either closed the findings or all of the issues were like continuing things like doing an attitude and awareness survey every year, which we are following up with.
All right.
Last briefing topic is a very important one, and I'd like to ask our guests to come up who will be doing this presentation, and we also have staff in the audience. But you might remember as we launched the electronic fare system, which has been subject of a lot of conversation of late, you wanted to know, and I wanted to know, how we were managing this process and making sure that this technology process, which as you have seen and heard is a complex technology project, didn't run into problems along the way and actually had the best chance we had for a smooth implementation. So we have secured the services of North Highland to do independent assessment of the management of the overall program, and then Anisian, thank you, another firm to look at systems integration and security aspects of that. And so we have the lead researchers and people assigned to this. And so I'd like to introduce Olivier and Adam, and we'll start, I think, with Olivier on the management aspects of electronic fare system. But we wanted to, again, share this with you. I think the preface I would make is that, to a large extent, you'll find that this is relatively good news, but it also helps us at this stage of the game provide us a really good roadmap for a strong finish on the project in a number of different areas. So, Olivier?
President Warner, members of the board, thank you for your time today. So the purpose of this presentation is to introduce you to the independent assessment that we've been running from North Island on the project management side and on the technical side from Anisian with Adam. Let's just find a clicker. After introducing our company briefly and myself, I will jump right into the project management assessment, and Adam will cover the two other assessments, system integration and system security, and wrap it up. My name is Olivier Julian. I work for North Island, a global consulting firm providing expert in program management as well as leadership. Personally, I have a master's degree of engineering. I've been a project manager for over 16 years. My focus being digital and consumer-facing products with a specialty on PMO, project program management office best practices. Anisian here, a technology firm providing actually services to companies on all matters securities, governance and privacy. And Adam will give you a little bit more background on the company. So let's start with the project management assessment. For us to look at this program, we decided to look at it through multiple lenses or categories. Those categories are usually best practice, industry best practice. This is how you set up actually a PMO, or this is how you run a program. I can walk you through them very quickly. Governance and organization management will look into the staffing, decision-making process, as well as role and responsibility on the project. Benefits management is about defining and understanding the business case. Scope management, how do you define the scope, track it, and document it? Project scheduling, that has to do with project schedule velocity, deviation from the schedule, as well as dependencies. Cost control is pretty straightforward. Internal communication and reporting. Quality, focus on processes to define and manage quality of the product. Vendor, that's about awarding contract and managing your vendors across the board. And finally, risk and issues. How do you report, track, and monitor your issues through the life cycle of the project? Based on those categories, we've defined a set of questions, qualitative and quantitative, and run through about 40 interviews with members of different business units, all related to the project, to come up with this assessment. Before I jump into the conclusion of the assessment, a few observations I wanted to share with you. First, around the team engagement, and the reason I put them actually first, because I think those will be key to understanding the result of the assessment, why I'm making those observations. Team engagement, it was clear from the start that the team was extremely responsive, very transparent. There was no holding back. The interviews were done one-on-one, so there was actually no reason to kind of hold back information, and we got actually everything we wanted, so that was great. The project is well run. We have actually clear processes that are documented and followed by the team. The artifacts from moving from one gate or one stage to the other are very well defined as well and documented. Number 3 to me is the most important, is the high confidence on the success of the project. And that sounds a little silly, but too often we see people not agreeing or not being in sync on whether the project will be successful. And in this case, from top to bottom, and we really interview all the levels, people agree that this project will be successful. They do agree it will be difficult, but the goals are achievable, and they do understand the impact this project will have on the community and for TriMet. So big plus right there. And finally, a call out for the leadership and sponsorship. From the start, again, we saw that the leadership and sponsorship team were very involved with the day-to-day of the project, day-to-day management of the project. And from the team, they are all perceived as being catalysts for success, as opposed to roadblock, which we see too often. So this perfect alignment are really positive results. So moving on to the result of the assessment, I'm not sure if you can read the chart from there, but so what we try to represent is actually rank all the dimensions that I described before, or the categories, from the center of the chart, which is really a team that is disorganized and reactive, all the way to the outer circle of the chart, which will indicate a team much more proactive and formally managed. The spider chart, you represent the global footprint of your project overall. Best practice for this type of project will require you to have all your dimensions fall within the outer circle of your chart, indicating actually the process are followed, formal and documented. And you can see in this case, you get a pretty homogeneous shape all around, except maybe a couple of dimensions that I will point out in a second. You fall well within this range. What we see often in this type of project is you have dimensions that are well understood and documented, while others are actually neglected by some of the project team, and you see a star shape rather than actually a circle. What you want to see on those programs is the circle that you have here. So pretty good representation. I like this view because it's visually representing quickly what the process is about. So out of this chart, we just came out with really 4 major recommendations for the staff, and I'm going to walk you through them, as well as the corrective action that have been taken so far. The first one around the project management plan. As we started interviewing people, it wasn't clear, people how the project schedule were being managed. It was not consistent across the board. Mostly. We didn't have a complete view of the schedule. Since then, the staff have actually included all stakeholders, all the dependencies, to provide a complete picture of the schedule and the project schedule. The second one we called out was actually around quality assurance and quality lead. When we joined the project, the team was moving into the testing phase, or close to moving to the testing phase, and it was important to us that a dedicated person was assigned to this role. It's going to be a critical role for the next 6 to 8 months. There was a person in place, not necessarily officially assigned to this task. Since then, the role has been officially assigned, and this person is leading the effort. So that's really positive. Third one was around internal communication. We did notice that communication was very solid, but there was some gaps, mostly because some team were not being communicated enough or adequately. So in order to correct that, the leadership team is now sharing actually the board report to all extended stakeholders, not just the core group, as well as they've created a monthly dashboard that they share to make sure the information circulates so people don't feel like they're being left out, because that could be actually a red flag. And then finally, around issue management, if you remember the chart, that was probably the dimension that was the weakest. And so we jumped on it and trying to understand why. And it was really a perception. It was not about the process. The process in place was strong. They have good documentation. However, they were not really known across the entire team, outside of the core team. And that's why when we asked people about risk and issue, the response went down a little bit because they did not completely understand. Since then, the staff have now extended the risk management strategy to all stakeholders and distributed actually the risk management log to make sure that everybody is involved and understand the risk for the overall project. So in conclusion, for this project management assessment, the takeaway, four bullet points. First one is the transparency and the engagement of the team that I mentioned earlier. The fact that actually from a project process and project management, it's a very well-balanced project across all dimensions. We don't see any major area of concern or any red flag. And then finally, any of the key opportunities and issues that we raised have been addressed within 30 days of the assessment. Any question before I pass it to Adam?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier, President Warner, members of the board. So we introduced my firm, Anishon. We are headquartered here in Beaverton, Oregon. We are a comprehensive information security professional services firm. We have worked with TriMet for, I believe, 5 years now as the lead assessor for the payment card industry standard that is a technical security standard protecting credit card data. And so we provided some peripheral advisory work concerning eFair much earlier in the design phases, and then we were brought on board here at this time to perform both the system integration and technical assessment that also includes a security assessment component. This here is summarizing the holistic results of both of those assessments, the overall picture of where we expect this project to be once it goes live, targeted in January of 2017. I think the important thing to point out here is that we're assessing a program that is still under development, of course, and so it should not be viewed as you would an audit where we're coming in to say, okay, this thing is live and let's take a look at what the issues are. But really, we're looking at the roadmap that they have designed and that they are executing against to see where we expect them to land and what they can do to ensure success. And our overall takeaway is that we think that the trend is strongly aligned with a successful conclusion from both a systems integration perspective, which really is the ability of eFair to meet its business objectives from a technical perspective, to perform as designed, and then from a security perspective, to minimize risk to the organization. So from the strengths perspective, there are a wide range of security technologies that are in place. There is a big emphasis on the point of sale in utilizing some advanced hardware encryption to protect payment data on capture. TriMet's really leading the industry with some of the design integration that they are working with some of the vendors to put in place. In doing so, really minimizes risk, particularly of breach of payment data, by protecting that data on immediate capture. So that's a paramount component of the risk mitigation strategy that's in place here. And it's very well designed. There's many vendors involved from a technology perspective, the different stacks that we have, from web applications to the interactive voice recording to the mobile applications to the actual hardware devices that we're talking about for the encryption. And there is, we see a really strong alignment and coordination between these different vendors, speaking to the work that was performed from a project management perspective, but that aligns from a technical perspective as well. There's a lot of cohesiveness of design and coordination between those teams. And lastly, the fact that TriMet has successfully been PCI compliant for several years means that there's a very robust framework of security controls that are in place that TriMet can leverage and apply to eFair, which minimizes the amount of effort to build things from the ground up in those cases. So that is, those are the key components of why we expect there to be very negligible amount of risk to the organization when this goes live. There's some opportunities for improvement at this point, and these are frankly what we would expect to see evaluating a system at this phase in its design. By definition, you're going to have security controls that are designed but not necessarily implemented while you're still building things out, and so it's appropriate to be where they are from that perspective. There are still some components that are under draft or design, but even those cases that have not been finalized, the actual draft designs are very strong and robust, and the components that have the least amount of design at this point are the most peripheral to the overall objective of the solution. The vendor development processes have an opportunity for some improvement from a security perspective as far as software development and system and network security controls, again, of this pre-production environment that is still under development, is not as locked down as it will be once it goes live. Again, having the existing PCI control framework to be extended to this environment once it goes live will mitigate these concerns. So from a system integration perspective, we looked at a few components here. The overall system design, transaction volumes, data security, disaster recovery, the design documentation, and where the various components of the system will be hosted. And so this is just a summary of the high-level key findings from these different tasks within the project. And so, again, the system design is that which is finalized or even in draft is very robust. There are some items that are to be determined or still being worked on, but when we look at them from a criticality to the overall success of the project, it makes sense that they would be deprioritized and focus on that which is the most integral to the success of the project from an integration perspective as well as a security perspective. Transaction volumes, by virtue of cellular networks, there's obviously a potential for some bottlenecks there that is, I think, a reasonably acceptable risk due to the value that provides for mobility, of course. And we would just note that TriMet has done some strong work in analyzing what the expected volumes would be and ensuring that it's within a reasonable threshold of potential loss. Even though you're using cellular networks, for example, these are not consumer-grade cellular networks, and so we don't have any significant concerns there. Data security is by and large quite strong. There are various vendors involved. Globe Sherpa is one that actually has made some great strides in this regard, which I think indicates the development life cycle that we're looking at here as far as maturation. where initially it was a fully multi-tenant environment that TriMet was going to be sharing this infrastructure hosted by Globe Sherpa, who is the mobile application developer. The back-end systems were going to be shared amongst their other clients, and as a result of the guidance that TriMet had already provided them prior to bringing us on board, they had started to carve out a dedicated environment there. And so there is still a little work to be done in that regard. But that was already proactively addressed prior to us coming on board. Disaster recovery. There's some observations here. None of these are critical. Some of them are, in fact, acceptable. The data warehouse, for example, which has no impact in the ability of, as far as public impact, if this data warehouse was down, really to provide reporting, is not redundant. There is a continuity of operations plan. It just has not been updated to fold in all of the eFair infrastructure at this time, which again is to be expected where we're at on the life cycle. There's some opportunities to improve the data backup process to make that more streamlined and effective, as well as restoration right now, some components, because we're still in this development phase where it's not been fully handed over to TriMet. There, at this point, would be a dependency on the vendors that we expect will be going away as the handoff is completed. Design documentation is extremely strong. There's been a big point of emphasis from TriMet within this project to ensure consistency of documentation and that the detail is there, and that really facilitated a more effective assessment from our perspective, because the documentation that was provided was so robust and accurate and cohesive. And that will also, I think, really help once this handoff is completed and things go live for TriMet to take full ownership of that which they will ultimately own. The hosting environment, TriMet is going to be hosting most of the technical infrastructure here, but there are some other components that are hosted by other vendors. And in some cases, we're recommending that they better align their infrastructure with industry best practices, regulatory standards that may not necessarily apply, but would be useful guidelines. And so the next piece is system security assessment that we performed in tandem here, focused on the following components: compliance review, network security, data security, physical and application security, IT policies, and test plans. Compliance review, the encryption scheme from a hardware encryption perspective dramatically reduces the applicability of regulatory requirements, namely PCI, by virtue of the confidence that the industry has in this type of solution. The regulatory burden is decreased significantly because the risk posture is so dramatically reduced. And so that is something that is a real solid attribute here. There are some products that you use that are assessed by third parties, and your compliance is dependent on that. That's not a new situation. That's historically been the case as well, and it's just important that that continues to be aligned with the versions that you're using. From a network security perspective, there is going to be an expectation of continuing to lock down the environment as it gets closer to production. So at this point, as a more test and development environment, of course, it's not going to be as formally managed and controlled and segmented as it will be when it goes live. But the framework is in place from a technical architecture perspective and the existing controls. From a data security perspective, the same thing would apply when we talk about the actual controls applied to the various servers and other infrastructure there, continuing to lock them down and apply more rigor as the project gets closer to production. The encryption key management processes, which I've talked about on the back end of the databases, these have not been finalized yet. However, the drafts that we've reviewed and are currently being close to finalized are very robust and designed aligned with best practices. And in some cases, there were instances where we found that there were design considerations made with the intent of security, with the accepted, perhaps, impact on the business that we feel could be reconsidered because there is so much defense in depth and is unnecessary. It's not necessarily providing you additional security value and therefore is unnecessary to take the potential business hit as a result, which we really think just speaks to the prudence and due diligence of this whole project, emphasizing security first and foremost at every layer and opportunity. Physical security, we really didn't see anything of major concern there. There's a little bit of inconsistency with some of the physical access control provisioning within TriMet, and the bottom line is there that can be easily aligned with the more formal access control management system. Fair handling media procedures as they exist right now are strong. They just need to be aligned, or the e-fair media needs to be aligned with the existing procedures. Again, as to be expected, where we're at on this life cycle here. Application security, there's going to be some challenges that your TriMet's going to have to manage some of the security of patching some of these different applications on their own, but that's not uncommon. It's particularly common with voice systems. And because TriMet's getting some custom off-the-shelf software, they just need to make sure they're coordinating with the vendors so that if there's a new version of the customized software, any of those changes get propagated to the TriMet customized version. And the formalizing secure software development and change management practices for the various vendors performing application development is probably the priority. IT policies, because there are so many vendors involved, and they are very well managed, and they are coordinated strongly, nevertheless, there needs to be a responsibility matrix before this goes live, so there's a very clear demarcation of what specific responsibilities are which vendors within the production environment. Test plans at this time have not had a large emphasis on security, more on functional testing, again, to be expected when you're testing the functionality during the development phases, but it's now TriMet's opportunity to start rolling in the security testing as part of that. So, in summary here, we're really impressed with the due diligence and the very strong emphasis on security at every aspect of this project. I had some periphery involvement working with TriMet from an audit perspective historically, very early on in this project, having asked questions and providing some guidance. And to be performing an assessment almost a year before it goes live, that in and of itself is a really commendable thing to do. It's more common that we're brought in to perform these assessments a month before the system goes live. And of course, the obvious problem there is that the cost of any remediation is going to be significantly higher. It's one thing to edit a document or a diagram. So that just shows the foresight here and an emphasis on security that TriMet is really taking seriously. Again, not everything has been fully finalized, but the prioritization makes sense and aligns with what we would expect. And again, in some cases, you guys are exceeding industry best practices and or maybe even willing to take a hit on maybe how it might impact the business as a cost-benefit trade-off that in some cases we feel is even unnecessary, which is great. It's usually the other way around that we're recommending to layer it on, and there might be some pushback there. So I think that's really commendable. And the bottom line is any of the gaps right now that we find are really minor and should be easily addressable this early in the life cycle, especially considering the other aspects of TriMet's network that we've worked with have such a strong controls framework in place. So
perhaps I can just summarize that these findings all become integrated now into the final work plan that leads us to the actual implementation of the project. So every one of these findings, and I had this sort of moment with Chris and with Tim McHugh, our IT, you agree with all these findings, and indeed they will integrate all of these findings into the roadmap ahead. So just to give you that security.
So how's the board feeling? Like we asked for some updates to make sure we were comfortable where things were going. I think my level of comfort is higher as a result of this, so thank you for coming. And I think did we say every quarter? Is that where we were on kind of getting an update on things?
Yeah, right.
So maybe you can give a quick summary of if there are any recommendations that needed attention,
right,
where we are on that. But I'm feeling like you're doing exactly what the board asked, and I'm feeling good that we're on the way to complete success.
Good, and just let me just acknowledge the great work of our staff, particularly Chris Tucker, his team, and Tim McHugh and his team. They're all working very, as Olivier noted, working together very well, and it's a very strong team. We're very proud of the work they're doing, and it will be industry leading when we're done. So that's the other thing, that this is new territory for fair systems.
Maybe this is a question better for Chris, but do we have enough staff? Attaboy.
You know, it's actually very interesting. We've been going through the budget.
Is there something that we can bring some people on for the
Chris knows
6 month or whatever?
If I had a door, it would be open. He knows very well that if he needs help, he can ask for it.
We're so close.
But I would exactly, and I would say that it's been very interesting going through the budget. We can discuss this perhaps more detail. Is that there are additional costs for us this year and next year before it starts to actually produce a reduced cost of the implementation. So we've built that into our budget and our projections, and so we're, I think, very cognizant of that. Chris's team did a magnificent job, frankly, of answering all my questions about why is this costing money this year, with a terrific matrix, much more detail than I suspect any of you want to see. I really go through all of the step through year by year of the implementation of the system. So,
well, the point is if they're short-staffed and they're overworked and you get tired, then things slip. It's just the
oh, they won't do that.
The one note I would make is that
back
in 2012, you approved a contract with CH2M Hills, our technical services consultant. That was also seen as an extension to staff. So when we get into a situation where there's a very in-depth analysis, we need assistance. CH2M has been doing an exceptional job for us. They're pretty well known in the market for these particular systems. They've helped with systems in San Francisco and Hawaii and Seattle and throughout the country, actually. They're helping in New York. But they have a very deep bench. So as we need additional assistance, which happens, we can look to them for that help. And that's really how we've been able to manage the fluctuation in work for the last 4 years.
Good.
And just to note, a really critical tests are really due in the month of March, and so we'll obviously report to you as well on that.
I want to thank Olivier and Adam for your work in your report. Obviously, any sort of IT project is a high-risk situation. And, I think, we've obviously gone into this with our eyes open and with the best possible staff. But to get a midpoint check-in is good, provides us all with a lot of comfort in, identifying things that we can improve on now. It's very important, so I appreciate the work that you guys have done. Just one thing I note, one of the things Olivier pointed out is internal communications are solid, some gaps are identified. Chris, one thing don't let fall into a gap is be sure to identify the entire project staff, how grateful we are, because they are really doing a great job.
Thank you for the presentation. What I think may get missed or may have gotten missed in this presentation is we're looking at this from this project's progress, but what was very fascinating and interesting was both, I think, Olivier and Adam referenced our current processes that support this project and how excellent a lot of our current processes are. So that's something that I don't want to just gloss over, because it just continues to give me the confidence that our team is doing an incredible job, not just on this project, but ongoing. Because a lot of the things that make this project successful are founded, in the great team that we have in place doing the day-to-day work that they're currently doing. So hats off again. I see this as a review of not just the project, but also a review of the great work that we're doing on a day in and day out basis that sometimes doesn't get the accolades that it needs. And there are a lot of folks who aren't on the project teams that are doing various things. Either it's the Orange Line, either it's the e-fare implementation. There's a lot of folks, or the public records request, which was exciting to hear about. We just don't always get the opportunity to thank those folks. So thank you for all the work that everybody's doing in conjunction with all of this and the great comments that we've heard so far.
Anything else for us today?
No, I think a
We've earned our
one-word
meeting.
answer is what you're looking for.
Thank you all. Yes.
Yeah.